My name is Lynn Mansell from AAG. There we go. And this is Callie Baskerville, our co-chair from AGNA. So we're going to be your chairs through the day. And I'll see if the slides will. There. The Alberta Association on Gerontology and Alberta Gerontological Nurses Association acknowledge our presence on the lands of Indigenous peoples across Alberta. We are committed to ongoing dialogue and shared learning to achieve healthy aging and quality of life for older Albertans. So, welcome again, and thank you for carving out the time from your busy schedules to be with us today and to address this very important topic, enhancing the seniors services workforce. The conditions of work are the conditions of care. For those of you that were at our workforce webinar, you might remember that the tagline, "The conditions of work are the conditions of care and service," is thanks to Dr. Pat Armstrong, who was one of the speakers at the webinar. She believes, as do we, that quality of life for older Albertans can only be achieved through a robust workforce and quality of work life across all sectors serving seniors and their families. The concept of a cross-sectoral think tank is new for AAG and unique, we think, in Alberta. We look forward to your active participation today and your feedback after the event. Everyone should have received an agenda package, so I won't take too much time to talk about details, but just to remind you, the restrooms are out these two doors and to the right. The emergency exit is also that direction. And any of you who wish to are welcome to wear masks as you choose. Okay. Here's where we're going to switch to a video. And this is this video is contributed by Dr. Bonnie Lashowitz, who I think is here today.
I have to hit volume.
Hello, thank you. There you are. Thank you, Bonnie.
All right, we're good? All ready?
Yeah.
You're not just going there to do a job. Work becomes a place that feels like another home. The pandemic hit, and we were thrown into a situation that would change the course of our lives. You feel like a bad guy because you're thinking, oh my gosh, what if this was me? Our residents have been with us for several years. Then all of a sudden, they were gone. I just have flashbacks to watching people die daily and quickly. We needed help, but we were supposed to be the help. My mother lives in Pakistan, but we call each other every day almost. Whenever I have a problem, she says, "No, you can do it. You know that you are very strong." We were physically fatigued, emotionally drained, and unable to grieve. The pandemic acted as a light that illuminated the cracks in the foundations of long-term care. And while that light might be fading, the cracks are still there, and we're still desperately trying to keep them from spreading.
Thank you to Bonnie and her team. So the situation is urgent, and workforce issues can't wait. We certainly have heard a strong sense of urgency from our webinars, interviews, background research, meeting discussions, and in the media, as recently as this morning, actually. And surveys say that up to 30% or more of the health workforce intends to leave in the next 2 years. We've heard about stress and moral distress insufficient time to provide the kind of care that the older adults need and workers want to give, and vacant positions and shifts. But now is our window of opportunity, and it's never been a better time to get together and address workforce issues and culture change in senior services in Alberta. We know about the MNP report recommendations, some of which address workforce. The Continuing Care Act regulations and standards are well underway, but not completed. There have been supports and announcements about workforce from provincial and federal officials. Healthy Aging Alberta is underway addressing the community-based service sector. There's a home care RFP that is looking at innovative new ways to provide care. The ministerial mandate letters, several of them, have referred to workforce issues and certainly increased awareness and concerns about workforce all around us. In summary, this is Alberta's unique opportunity. Healthy aging and quality of life for older adults in a healthy and prosperous Alberta. We all need to focus not only on investing in our workforce, but defining the returns on those investments. So this is our purpose today, to inform policy recommendations for change over the next 2 years or so, although some of your recommendations might be for a bit longer. We want to take action sooner rather than later toward a vision of healthy aging and quality of life for all. So you may have remembered this inverted pyramid model from the MNP report, and we've been using it to frame our work over the last number of months. The top of the pyramid is where most senior Albertans live and can stay in the community with the help of community-based services. Individuals with moderate to complex care needs can also be served in a home setting with the support of appropriate packages of care, housing, and community services. The smallest group of individuals with the most complex care needs require continuing care homes with sufficient intensity of services. The continuing shift to the community has significant implications for the workforce. One of the things that our think tank planning committee had to do was select priority areas for discussion today. We developed some criteria as follows. It had to be informed by the consultations that we'd had with key stakeholders, reflect a cross-sectoral approach, complement initiatives already underway, represent feasible activities over the short and medium term, and have a balance between recruitment, retention, and sustainability-related issues. In addition, we wanted to use Carol Estabrooke's nested dolls model to define which outcomes would require leadership and collaboration at the system, organizational, and frontline levels. So these are the three kind of interrelated target areas that we'll be discussing today. Retain employees with sufficient staffing and funding for success to increase the viability and value of seniors serving workplaces. Develop work environments with empowered employees and teams with flexibility and service delivery, enabling momentum to meet service needs in new ways. And ensure and evolve the workforce supply with innovation in recruitment and partnerships for robust education programs and certification. After our keynote speaker, there will be 3 panels focusing on each of our 3 priority areas, followed by table discussions. So about 30 minutes for each panel and about an hour for discussions of each of the 3. You know about the assignments to your tables on your name tag, and there'll be facilitators and note takers at each table. Please be as specific as possible in your discussions with a focus on dialogue and problem solving. As a think tank, we want to come together with consensus as much as possible. And there are sheets on the table, actually they were handed out, in case you want to make notes as you hear the panels. After panel number 1 at 12 noon, we'll move to the Marquee Ballroom for lunch, which is up the stairs and around the corner to the left and then down a hallway. There should be some signs about the Marquee Ballroom. And then at 12:45, we come back here promptly for panels 2 and 3. So what are the outcomes? Your input will be used to inform a report that will be submitted to the Stakeholder Collaborative Committee and the Workforce Planning Committee members in February 2023. and then it will be submitted to our funder, Alberta Health, along with a communication plan for wider distribution and key messaging. It is our hope that some actions can maybe begin before that through the efforts of leaders and culture change champions in this room. Okay, now turn it over to Kelly to introduce our keynote speaker. And we'll need the next presentation.
Thank you, Lynn. And welcome on behalf of EGNA. Welcome everybody for joining us today. This is quite exciting. Certainly speaking from my association in nurses, the answer right now is not just to work harder. It's not just to lean in a bit more. We have to take a moment and look at the people around us. So, as I was saying, if you look around you, this is quite a community. This is a lot of people you may have known or worked with or respect very much, because we are all part of the same community of practice. So today, this is an opportunity not just to work harder, but certainly to collaborate, to coordinate, and find a way forward. It's very exciting then that our keynote speaker is Dr. Carole Estabrooke, because Carole has devoted a lot of years into understanding what is happening in long-term care world and in care of seniors, and to being able to figure out not just how to learn stuff, but how to turn that into knowledge translation into real action. And having been a frontline manager and being able to test that, I have great respect for how much that empowers us to do something meaningful. So, Carole is currently a professor at the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Alberta. She holds a Canadian Research Chair in Knowledge Translation in the care of older people in long-term care, and she's been the scientific director of the Pan-Canadian Applied Research Program called Translating Research in Elder Care. You may have heard of TREC, and that's been since 2007. So many years of contributions. She started at the University of New Brunswick, moved over to do a graduate degree at University of Alberta, and finished a postdoctoral fellowship in Toronto. So talk about a education that spans Canada. She is the recipient of numerous awards because of that many years commitment to understanding and doing meaningful research in the area. I won't go through them all, but certainly just want to say the Royal Order of Canada, the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences. This is many years of dedication that probably has affected a lot of our practice without us even knowing. So I will invite Carole to come up and share her wisdom with us. And Lynn, if you'd like to, not right now? Later, okay. Very good.
Thank you so much, and I need the...
Clicker right here.
I'm not going to stand up there because then I won't see the slides and I'll be here too long and I won't do what I'm supposed to do, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to try to run 2 pieces of technology, which might be more than I'm ready for this morning, but let's see how it goes. So thank you so much for the invitation. It's really nice to be out and about again. I've had a bit of trouble getting out and about after COVID. And even small groups, I think, oh, there are viruses running around the room, but I think I'll be okay today. And it's nice to be in a friendly group where I know so many people. Now, let's see if I know how this works. It's always about where you point it. Maybe this is it. Maybe that one's it. Maybe I just point it anywhere. Well, let's see here. Maybe this one's it. I've run out of buttons. I can do it over there. Did you do that or me? Maybe a combination? We don't know. Well, let's see how she goes. So I'm supposed to do a call for action. I'm not quite sure what that looks like, but let's see how we go. I want to point out 2 or 3 reports that many of you already know about. This one came out very recently from what used to be the Institute of Medicine, is now the National Academy of Medicine in the United States. It's one of the follow-ups to the 1986 report that was so influential in the U.S. on improving care quality in nursing homes. And that led to the 1987 OBRA Act, which is where the infamous 4.1 came from, and I'll talk about that in a bit. There are some good recommendations in here. Their goals are pretty consistent with what we're doing, and it reflects the fact that what we're involved in Alberta is part of an international global effort, at least in higher income countries that have the kind of social structures that we do. We're working now, it's a miracle. We did this report in the very early days of COVID for the Royal Society of Canada. It isn't like the other reports. We had no help and no money in 8 weeks to do it. So it was I don't know how we did it actually. We were hot with worry about what was happening in COVID. But it does unfortunately stand as the only Canadian report about long-term care, but it is quite narrowly focused, although we tried to make an effort to talk about the history of why this had happened in long-term care. So we're going to do an update in 2023, again, with no money, and at least we have, I think, 6 months to do this one. The Royal Society isn't a particularly generous outfit when it comes to these things. We had some problems because the work was so, there was so much to do and write about, and we had 8 weeks, and so the group sat down, the task force sat down and had a bit of a come to Jesus talk one day and said, if there's only one thing we would recommend to anybody who will listen, what would it be? And it only took us a heartbeat to say, fix the workforce, because that is so foundational to everything else. And then, of course, there were a bunch of other things that we recommended, some of which are out of date now because they were fixed right away, and many which have not had any attention at all. And then you know this report. This is the facility-based continuing care report that was done here in Alberta. This is a very good report. I'm sitting on a number of national panels and committees and boards, and I haven't seen another report that's as exhaustive as this one. It has 40-plus recommendations situated within 11 or 12 policy areas, and some of the recommendations are pretty what you would call solid and evidence-based, but they're actually almost revolutionary given how constrained and restricted this sector has been. They recommend 4.5 hours. It's like, oh my gosh, people read that, and nobody else in the country is recommending 4.5, and as I'll talk about in a minute, it's still going to be shy of what we actually need, but it's a terrific start. So you should be proud of this report. And I want to stop right now and say something I said to a group the other day. You should be proud that you're in Alberta. Like lots of people will tell you if you're in a meeting and they're from central Canada that, oh, you're leading everything and you don't know whether to believe them or not. Usually not, because they're just saying it. But on these panels I've been sitting on nationally, I haven't seen any province that says systematically and progressively moving towards transformation and actually talking about it without fainting. Being really committed to doing it, and has a lot of different groups from the government right down to associations of professionals and the Gerontological Association and advocacy groups working at it. So if there's any province in the country that's likely to get there or partway there, it's likely to be Alberta. There's some reasons it's like that. I think there's been a group of people working in a dedicated way, very much behind the scenes for 30 years, and they just keep chipping away at the rock. And then policy windows open and circumstances change. So this is a very important report for Alberta. And as you know, and as I'm sure Karine will talk about later in the day, there's all kinds of things happening legislatively. My dolls. So I wasn't going to put the dolls in until Marlene said, we've been using the dolls. I thought, oh gosh, I better put them in. I was doing a talk for this group back in, I think it was June, and I was trying to get a picture to represent how complex the layers of context are. And it was very challenging because Russia had just invaded Ukraine, so I didn't think I probably should use nested Russian dolls, but I finally found Walt Disney dolls. I'm trying to be neutral to all the things I shouldn't step my feet into. And the point is that people who are on the right, caregivers and recipients of care, they sit inside these nested structures. I work primarily at the level of the resident care unit because we believe that's where quality is made, that's where residents touch caregivers, where families touch residents, that's where the action is. But of course, multiple things influence those units. The facility is a major influence. The organization, whether it's a chain or a smaller organization, is a huge influence around philosophy and values. and each organization has slightly different ones. Then, of course, you're in a zone, and we know there's some zone differences in Alberta. And then you're sitting in a region and in a province. And of course, we'd be remiss to think we're not sitting in a country, although sometimes it doesn't feel like we belong. There are things that happen nationally that influence every province. There are many things on the drawing board nationally right now. And I hope that we take from it what we can, and don't stop in frustration and say not for us, but look at what we can draw from what's going to happen nationally. The new long-term care standards are coming out in January. I was reviewing a section of them last night, and very unhappily, because it's been a real challenge to put those standards together, because they're for homes, but they often speak to things over which homes have no control. So we're trying to find a balance with those standards, but I think you'll find them really comprehensive, and there are some exciting things in them. And then the National Seniors Council is working on all sorts of initiatives. They did some work on ageism. They're doing some work on aging in place now. So though you're sitting in this vast complex of contextual influences. And so when staff say to me, when we do a survey and we go back and do feedback, and they say, well, you haven't fixed it yet, it's hard to explain to them that no one entity, and certainly Lord knows not a researcher, can change it for them. And so what we've taken to do is talking about what we do with the findings, who we talk to, and sometimes we bring the people we talk to them, so that they at least have some notion that we're trying, because staff are very sensitive, as they should be, to researchers parachuting in and taking their data, which has been going on for decades and decades. And they'll tell you in a heartbeat, oh no, we're not going to do your survey this time. You didn't come back and tell us. They did that to the first wave, and we smartened up right away. We were going to wait to do it at the end, but it became clear they needed feedback right away. This is a very touchy mover, shaker thing, whatever it is. There we go. So I'm going to talk a bit about staffing. You all know this. It's important to all the quality areas: quality care, quality life, quality of end of life, and quality of staff's work life. It's the pivotal thing, I think, that we're struggling with in healthcare right now. And the 4.1, the infamous 4.1. Just know it's a good aspiration. If you're sitting at 2.2 or 3.2, it's a perfectly fine aspiration. But it was done in 2021 in the United States of America with kind of patchy evidence. They used an expert panel because they didn't have a lot of empirical evidence. It was built for the clientele of 2021. Your clientele's changed a lot. So it's not adequate, but it's a good place to start. Longwood's asked a group of us to do papers for them last year, and mine assignment was the one, of course, about which I knew the least in terms of actually knowing the research really well, so it was a bit of a pain to do. But I wrote about staffing, and I learned some really exciting things there. There's never been, when we knew this before we started this, in this country, in all of its whatever we are, 150 years old, not one staffing study ever commissioned for long-term care. So nobody knows what they're doing. We're just making it up as we go. Now, you experientially know in the sector approximately what you need, and you know it's variable, and it changes with all sorts of conditions, but there's no reason we couldn't get some good data to support your decisions with. Somebody's going to have to commission it. It's a complex study to do, and you can't do it just by looking at thresholds in the inner eye data. That would be part of it, but there's a whole bunch of things you have to look at, and I'll talk about those. The Europeans are doing some of the best work in this area, and of course there's all kinds of squabbles going on among researchers about which way is best. But the essence of what they're saying is that you've got to know, this is not rocket science, you all know this. You've got to know about your residents, you've got to know about your workforce, and you've got to know about your work environment to make thoughtful, good decisions about what kind and how much staffing you need at what points in your day, week, or year. We don't have much data on most of those things. We have pretty good data in Canada on the residents. It's not perfect data, but it's so much better than many countries have and that many other sectors of the healthcare system have. It's better than acute care. They don't have a systematic routine collection of outcomes on residents. So what about these residents? You all know that they're changing. they're not the white homogeneous mass that they're sometimes treated as. They're still predominantly in Canada probably white because of the generations that are in there now, but that is changing very rapidly. And that's because of our development. You know, our immigration patterns originally from Northern Europe are what we're seeing still in our homes, but that's going to change quite remarkably as the boomers age through the system. I just want to put a plug in for boomers. We are not breaking the system. We're just a bulge of population that everybody's known was coming since 1946 and acting like it's a surprise. We're not breaking it. So we need to start thinking about what that population is going to look like. The length of stay in Alberta has plummeted dramatically in nursing homes in the last 15 years. Part of that was, I believe, a deliberate strategy around aging in place and keeping people out of nursing homes longer. But there's nothing free in the system. And everything we do has consequences, some of which we understand and some of which we may or may not expect. And this one's had both, I think. I mean, if there's a good news story, if you want to see if your policy maybe worked and consider that. But it's meant that they come later in their trajectories of everything. They're older, their dementia's more advanced, their chronic diseases, their heart failure, their arthritis, their Parkinson's, everything's more advanced. So their needs have skyrocketed. But we have kept staffing kind of the same, and that just creates a gap. And you all feel that right now really acutely, and that's been happening for a long time. It's not like brand new. It's happening to everybody who's trying to keep people out of nursing homes longer. Lots of reasons why, I won't go into those. And of course, what happens is that things like your activities of daily living skyrocket. They're more dependent, they need more help. And your CHEST scores, which reflect people who are more frail and closer to death, they go up. So you have much more end-of-life care. That's why it felt so hard before COVID. And now it's just so much worse. We've known that this perfect storm was coming, as I said, for quite a while, and the perfect storm has had really significant consequences. I think what it did, in part, and this is a resilient workforce, but it pushed them until they didn't have as much resilience during COVID as they might have had. They still did better than people in lots of areas. Then there are the staff who are even more diverse. They're just a potpourri of people from all over the world with very low numbers in urban centers, at least in Canada, who have a white Northern European descendancy. That's the minority population. It's different in places like the interior and the Atlantic provinces still, but it is changing in those places too. So you know all this. Most of the care is given by currently unregulated workers. That's changing in Alberta. It's an older, female, racialized workforce. They're poorly remunerated relative to other sectors. They're almost all women. 75% have English as a second language. About a third of careys worked more than one job pre-pandemic. And even though quality of work life is associated with care quality, we were seeing really disturbing levels of things like burnout pre-pandemic. However, the good news was we were also seeing quite a bit of what you might call resilience. We weren't measuring resilience then, but this sense that their work had meaning. I think that probably served as a bit of a buffer against the effects of the burnout they were experiencing. They care about the residents. They know sometimes they're the only people that are going to be with them. They don't want to see them suffer. So they do care. And if you read Stephanie Chamberlain's work where she talks about the unbefriended, you'll see the whole underground economy that goes on. You know, they're not supposed to buy things for the residents, they're not supposed to do this, and they're not supposed to do that, but they do it. And they bring their husband's secondhand clothes in, and when a resident dies, they collect the clothes for the people who have none. They really go above and beyond. So this is what burnout looked like in the fall of 2019. That's the top 3 bars. The first box is cynicism, and the second box is emotional exhaustion. Those are the 2 things that make up burnout in the measure we use. The top one, if I remember right, is 2019, and the bottom one is 2021. So what's important isn't the actual percentages, well, they actually do matter. It's that all levels, this is care aides, nurses, and allies, had a lot of red on their bars. That's people who were at high risk for burnout. And it got worse, not surprisingly, with COVID, but maybe not as much as you would think. In particular, the care aides, well, they all got worse, actually. The nurses, for example, their emotional exhaustion increased more. And for the care aides, their cynicism increased. So these are really worrisome because that means in some of these groups, almost half of them were at high risk for burnout. And burnout's not a kind of a movie concept. It's a real thing. You feel really crappy. It affects your work. It affects your relationships. It affects your sleep. It affects your health. It's an unpleasant thing. And if it goes on unremitted and unaddressed, people quit. People become disconnected and disengaged, and you've seen that worker, or they have meltdowns. Usually they become more disengaged, and they quit. And it takes a long time if you've gotten yourself really burned out to recover. It can take years. On the other hand, again, it's the same structure with the 3 levels of staff, and 2019 on the top, 2021 on the bottom. They have this ridiculously high amount of efficacy, the sense that their work is meaningful and important. And we hadn't been measuring resilience pre-pandemic, but we started measuring it, and they've got a really healthy dose of normal resilience. That's what we're trading on right now in all sectors in health. We're trading on that because it's still stretched out there. There aren't enough staff. Things are really rough. I talk to care managers and they say, oh, please don't forget us. It's not gone away. COVID's not gone. I don't know how long we can trade on that. It won't be forever, but it is a very resilient workforce. This is just some data on ethnicity and years they've worked. And this is data about the RNs and the LPNs. And as you can see that only 20 to 30%, and why do I keep putting this up? Because how we program is influenced, or should be, by people's backgrounds. And I don't think we're yet gearing to that. Even in the regulated professions, the numbers have changed quite a bit over the last 20 years. And then it's even more dramatic. This was the COVID sample we had. We had 28 homes. They were representatively collected. So only 16% of the care aides in Alberta, in Edmonton and Calgary was where these data were from, identified as white. And no surprise, most of them are from the Philippines. But other groups are growing too. So we have to think about this when we're planning. And I'll talk, if I get done in time, a little bit about employee assistance programs, which are my current nub of irritation, and right across the whole health sector. I'll do it right now because it really bothers me. If we think that bringing, no offense to any mental health professionals in the crowd, if we think that running few mental health professionals in, and that's going to fix anything, we're so wrong. The care aides won't use them. Most of the nurses won't use them. And it's often not what they need. The people after 9/11 taught us that. They went back 3 years after setting up all these fancy things in Manhattan for them that would be covered by insurance, and they weren't using them. They said, why? They said, well, we went to our community groups or our churches or whatever the group was that they collected around, and we did yoga, and we got massages, and we did some meditation. I can't think of the other one that I want to bring up. But they found things, and a lot of the things they found were physical, because you need to be in your body when you've been traumatized. It's really hard to get in it and stay in it. And you need connection. You desperately need connection. And we asked Carries what they did. And they said our faith and our church groups and our team. Those are the 2 big things they used. The only people that talked about going to get counseling were the managers. They could afford it. And they also bought housekeeping, and they also had food brought in, like skip the dishes or whatever. But that isn't available to many of the people who need the support. So I think we could co-design wonderful programs if we sat down with the groups and co-designed them and did a root and branch overhaul. It'll be different for every group. And they'll tell you what they need because they actually know. Managers fared the worst. I was quite surprised at this. Well, not really, but troubled maybe is a better word. Their cynicism and exhaustion got worse, like everybody's did, but their job satisfaction and their mental health dropped on measures we'd been using for 15 years that had been absolutely stable. And they dropped significantly. I don't know if anybody here is a manager who was at some of the manager webinars we did. I couldn't figure out why they kept turning their cameras off. I said to somebody in my staff, why are they turning their cameras off? You know, maybe I'm boring them, whatever. They said, no, can't you tell? They're crying. They were crying, I think, because they were seeing their own numbers and being heard and acknowledged. I mean, managers are like everybody. They're a wonderful cross-section, and they're on a bell curve. But most of them are in the middle. They're average caring managers, and they're trying to do a good job. And they went way above and beyond. Most of them talked about helping the units and the home as much as they could, and then they did their own work on nights and weekends. And then they did all kinds of crazy, well, they weren't crazy things at the time. You know, they slept in the basement and didn't tell their kids that they were home. They were afraid of infecting their families. They felt guilty when their staff got sick. They felt guilty when residents died. They'd kept COVID out for 12 months and then it got in and they felt guilty. They took a real hit and they're at significant risk of leaving. And they're older women, so they can leave. I don't usually show this one because people get all bothered about it, but I decided to show it today. We're working with a couple of trauma psychiatrists. This is the only reason I would dare even measure this stuff. But we thought we should measure it because other people were. It's not a diagnostic, it's a screening tool. So it doesn't mean that 30% of the managers have PTSD, but it means 30% of them are screening positive and might need referral. That means they're having symptoms that hurt. They're having intrusive nightmares and other sorts of symptoms. So they're suffering. They don't feel good. And all of the groups have this. We don't know. All we know about this number, which is quite high, 25 to 30%, is that it's very consistent with other reports all over the world about healthcare workers. We don't know the pre-pandemic levels, though. So we're going to measure again in a year and see. We're hoping they start to come down. If they stay up or rise, that's more of a worry. We measure a bunch of other mental health scores that I haven't put here. Some of them don't look too bad, and some of them look quite worrisome. Insomnia, woohoo, that took a hit, a really bad hit. And that would be consistent with some of this. Twice as many managers as nurses said they were thinking about leaving at least a few times a month. So I think that's just a little canary about what we might be going to expect. And then there's the work environment. And we all know why it's important. And back to the dolls. I'm going to talk a little bit about some data at this microsystem level, the clinical unit, the resident care unit, rather. So we measure it using the ACT, and most of you who worked with me know that. It isn't like 50 items that you can add up and get a number, sadly. Trust me. We have 10 constructs in it, and what we do is it's kind of like, if there's a statistician here, just don't listen. It's kind of like putting blood in a test tube and spinning it in a centrifuge. We use some statistical techniques that pull apart units and homes so that we can talk in a more simplified way about it. And we talk about red and green. People in green homes have more favorable scores on a combination of those, and people in red homes have less favorable scores. And everything we try and associate seems to be associated. So physical and mental health are associated with living in a green home or working in a green home. You don't have to see a psychiatrist or take Valium or whatever you're taking. All you have to do is work in a green home, and you will report higher scores on physical and mental health. You will see less missed care in a green home. And you'll also see less rushed care. And these are significant. So you don't even have to do anything. Well, it's not exactly true. You have to work on your work environment, but you don't have to do anything to people per se, to beat them up and say you have to stop missing care. Missed care is an interesting one. They did some studies in Europe. And even when there's way more staffing than we have, they still have missed care. So it's not just about staffing. We're doing a little study this coming year about it. And then importantly also, residents in the last year of life, if they live in a home that's got a more favorable environment, they have fewer burdensome symptoms. Pain, dyspnea, and these are just the two I'm showing. So without doing a whole thing to get people to manage pain better, which is important, if you work on the work environment, you also can improve residents' life and quality of life. So what do we need? We need better data. We have pretty good data around residents. It's extremely limited for workers. You know, you saw it in COVID. We didn't know how many people were working more than one job in Canada. Turns out everybody was running around going, oh my God, they're working 2 jobs, they're working 3 jobs. So that's something that we need to collect routinely, data like that. Data are almost non-existent on the workforce. Let me go back to data on staff. They have to be collected carefully. Some of these data are really sensitive. Data about race and ethnicity and sexual orientation and gender identity and salaries and how many people are you caring for, are your parents at home. They have to be collected so carefully, and those data have to be protected and only used in the aggregate. This is one of the things that I'm fussed about with the standards, that we make sure that when we say that there have to be standards around data, that they're done appropriately and they're handled, because they can be used punitively, as we've all seen in the past. There's almost no data on the work environment, except in some research collections. And that's really important, because how do you know if your work environment's getting better or not if you don't measure it, do something, and then re-tap it to see if it's gotten better? And then, of course, we need data about staffing, but I've already talked about that one. I thought I'd throw in a few strategies. Like, I know you have lots of strategies, but if we did nothing else, let's just boost the staffing. But it won't be enough, and to just blanket the staffing and not do anything else will land us, I suspect, right back where we are. So we have to do other things. We need to look at how work is done. If for no other reason than we haven't got enough bodies to do the work, they're just not there. And I think we should ask people how to work differently. We shouldn't tell the carriers how to work differently. We should say, how could we work differently? They don't know everything, but they know a whole bunch of stuff. We have to attend to supporting, preparing, and the ongoing education of managers and other supervisory staff. The managers are feeling like nobody values them. And you know, perception's as important as reality. We may value them at a really extraordinary level, but they have to feel it. So we have to think about, well, what makes a manager feel valued? And implement those things. They're often really small things. And we shouldn't forget the RNs who are supervising the care aides and the LPNs. That's who they often get most of their supervision from. We have to pay attention to what the managers are telling us was wrong during COVID. We need better employee stress and health-related supports. That's my employee assistance program bugbear. I mean, they had these same programs when I was a clinician 1,000 years ago, and we wouldn't use them. One time it was really bad, and they drugged 6 psychiatrists in to talk to a staff of 150 people, and we made them cry because we were so angry that they would dare walk in and think they knew what our lives were like. So they're very much the staff under conditions that you've had during COVID, like soldiers in the trenches. You know, they bonded together, and it's hard to just put on support for them. We have to listen to what they need for support. And then out of this list, I'll just talk about, it's not enough to have data. It is just not enough. The data have to be accessible, relevant, usable, and managers have to have the support to use the data. We went in and did a trial in, 35 homes, and we thought we'd be smart and go in and say, well, we'll use spreadsheets. That didn't work. We ended up using paper and pencil and teaching them how to make a run chart. And it's not that they aren't really bright, it's just not a tool that's in their toolbox. We need to make it possible for them to use the data in a meaningful way. And we've got to stop doing pilots and demonstration projects, dear Lord. In 1976, Monique Bajam put an editorial in the Canadian Medical Association Journal decrying the land of pilot projects. We're still doing it. It's not good enough. You need them to say, well, that idea is bad, that one's good, throw that one out. But once you got an idea, it's good, you got to move it. And that is really hard work. And every jurisdiction in this country does it. The governments do it. The funders like it. Quick, move on, get a new idea. So if we could move to really broad-scale implementation of the things that we think have legs, and then evaluate them, because sometimes things change, and you don't want to spend money on something that stopped working. And things do. And then a last comment about intersectionality, because that's what we have to talk about in this world, and it's really important. All of the residents have multiple overlapping intersectionalities that even if they weren't old, they would make them very complex. And they're being cared for by staff who have these complex, overlapping, intersectional issues that make them vulnerable. So that's a recipe for a far bigger disaster than we've had. If you've got the highly vulnerable taking care of the highly vulnerable. And despite that, the system, it suffered, but it hung together, and we kept doing the best we could, and the staff, by and large, didn't run for the hills. No, this is a testament to how resilient they are. But we have to do our programming along those lines. So I hope I'm on time. Yes, I think I am, mostly. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion today.
All right, so here we are at 10:15. And we have just a golden opportunity, I believe.
We haven't seen Carol for a little while in person, and some of you from AAG may remember that at our AGM in June that we awarded Carol our Mary Morrison Davis Award for Achievement in Senior Services. So we'd like to take the opportunity today to give her.
Yes, so it is 10:15 right now. What we're going to do is a 15-minute break. I encourage you to get up, move around a little bit. You probably sat in your car and then got to sit here for a bit. But right promptly at 10:30, we're going to get started. You're going to make sure that you check your tag, and whatever table you're listed for the first discussion, please make sure that you're settled at that table for when we get started again at 10:30. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to invite our moderator to start and our first panel.
Thank you. Good morning. My name's Marilyn Willison-Leach, and my most recent position was Senior Vice President of Clinical Services at Aged Care, but I've retired a couple of months ago, which is why I'm here, because I can. Thank you, Carol. That was a really wonderful presentation this morning. I'm here to moderate this panel on outcome number 1, which is retain employees with sufficient staffing and funding for success. And we do want to increase the viability and value of seniors serving workplaces. This is a really fundamental, as we heard, target outcome. And it's very important for us to work more formally across senior serving organizations. The lack of sufficient staff and funding to support retention in this competitive work environment is an area of long-standing concern in this province, and as we've heard, across Canada and certainly internationally. This illustrious panel here represents a wealth of experience, and they're going to share their perspectives on key questions important for our deliberations at the table about the changes we need to see, and the discussion now will stimulate our discussions that we're going to have at the table. So I'll get moving right on and start with Blair Phillips, and Blair's going to talk about what was learned through COVID-19 and what we can take forward. Blair.
Good morning, everybody. I don't know how we let you retire, Marilyn, so.
You're the SVP of HR, so.
I know. Thanks. I did something wrong already. Good morning, everybody, and it's absolutely my pleasure to be able to come today and share some of our learnings, and really looking forward to the discussions through the day, because I think they're well overdue as we move forward. But I think some of my comments certainly reinforce and reflect what Dr. Estabrooke was mentioning this morning, and of course the challenge of how do we get traction on some of these things. From Aged Care's approach and experience dealing with some of the pandemic, like any other organization, we took an immediate response. It was a tactical response of how we needed to respond. It was crises management that I think we all faced. I hate to say that, you know, there are some benefits from the pandemic, but I truly think there were. And as we reflect back a bit, what changes were we forced to do? One of the first things that really stands out for us in terms of some of the lessons learned was really that reinforcement and the importance of the holistic approach to care and resident focus. And two areas stand out in our minds, and that was really the role of the recreation department and the recreation therapists and communication. And I have a very, very vivid image of being in one of our facilities, looking out the window of one of the resident rooms and seeing the family members outside the building with their hands on the window. And it was such a powerful message to say they could have been halfway around the world because they were not allowed to visit in person with their loved one. And I think what we saw through the role of the recreation therapists and using the use of technology and communications really enabled a different type of connectivity with those families and their loved ones. And at the end of the day, that sense of transparency and enabling that transparency in the communication with those families really made a huge difference in terms of trying to minimize the degree of isolation that everybody was impacted by. So that was probably first and foremost. It really put the spotlight on the degree of transparency that we have to work towards as an industry and as an organization, I think. The second area was really about the sustainability and unintended consequences. And I think this is really a discussion about tactical intervention versus strategic intervention. And I think we have to be very careful when we talk about planning that good tactical planning does not mean good strategic planning. And it may be appropriate at a certain time and place, but as we look at what good tactics can do, if you're not careful, they can have unintended consequences. It was mentioned this morning about the single site order. We're really making decisions with a blindfold on, and I don't think we anticipated we would lose 30+% of the workforce with the restrictions of the single site. So that was very significant for the industry and the organization. Admirable for the industry to be able to redesign the workforce overnight. But that made a huge difference. The other thing that, and no disrespect if anybody's affiliated with agencies in this room, but agencies played a very important role in the moment. But unfortunately, we see some of the agencies and how they provide staffing, and this is across the country, it's truly undermining the integrity and the sustainability of the workforce. And it's actually detracting the efforts, I think, of employers to try and sustain, and it's becoming really an economic battle between employers fighting for staff at the expense of a blank check for agencies across the country. So we have to be very careful because there are activities underway that are really undermining the efforts that I think we're all putting forward. The other area that really stands out for me is, and it was mentioned earlier, the make or break was the site-based leadership. It doesn't matter what bureaucracy you have within an organization or the system, the site-based leadership and being able to empower them and support them with the right type of supports. For us, it made or broke us in terms of the response and how we were able to cope during probably one of the worst times as we can all relate to. And it's given us food for thought to say, how do we reflect and how do we think about the role of these senior leaders as really being, in essence, the CEO of a site? How do we make sure that they can have the tools and the information to reconcile, I would say, the business context and the operating context and the people management? And that's much easier said than done, but I think sometimes where decisions are made within organizations are at the wrong place, and where we can empower people of where the true value add of the work takes place is going to be that much more important. And I am speaking from a large organization that if you're not careful, bureaucracy can come into play quite quickly as we look at systems and formalization of systems. So the role of the frontline senior leadership was absolutely invaluable, and I think probably the most under-recognized in terms of the period of time that we've gone through. The other comment I would say is we've talked about funding, and I think receiving the additional funding from the government, the responsiveness to that, made all the difference in the world in terms of relieving a key pressure point to say, do what you think is appropriate, respond appropriately. It may not be ideal, but there is dollars there to support the interventions needed. And I think collectively we were so appreciative of the collaboration with government to be able to respond that way and respond effectively as we could. The other sort of comment or observation I would say is looking at the speed of change. During a crisis, we have to respond immediately, and I think we have to be very cognizant to say we have to see progress over perfection. It's critical. The only other comment as we look forward for consideration is really understanding who the key stakeholders are and points of leverage. And I'm not in many discussions that ever acknowledge the role of unions. And how do we actually get them to the table to balance the dialogue between a rights-based orientation and collective agreements and the language versus a principle-based approach to say, what are the principles in collective agreement language that actually enable appropriate staffing, appropriate scheduling, appropriate consistency of care? And I think we have some opportunities there that we need to be focused on. I'm basically out of time, so I'll make two other comments. One, data has been mentioned that it's like driving a car looking in the rearview mirror. We are so short on data, and we're busy, and I think the danger there, we focus on a tactical response, and we need some data to look at strategic planning, and that's not, we don't have that, so that's critical. And the other aspect, I think the mere fact that we're all here today is as we look at collaboration and how we think out of the box and challenge each other's perspectives, that is going to be, I think, help to shape the roadmap as we move forward. So those, sorry for going over time, but appreciate those were a few of the learnings, I think, from, and a bit of reflection from the aged care perspective. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Blair. Really appreciate your comments, and I know it will help with the discussion. And having been at aged care through all of that, I completely concur with all of your comments, and they will make a difference, I know, in moving forward. Next, we have Carla Beck, the CEO of the Bethany Group, and Carla is going to talk to us about the Christian Health Association research regarding systematic issues causing workforce instability. So thank you, Carla.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I talk fast, Blair, so we'll be good. Just to build on what you've shared and what Dr. Estabrooke has shared this morning as well, we were already noticing for many years the inadequate care hours that we were being funded for prior to the pandemic, and I think it just exacerbated that to have that issue come to our sites then when our staff are struggling so much. So while there are calls for that increase to the 4.1 hours, and I know that there's work being done on that, at this point in time, we're still just funded for those 3.02 hours. And I think we have to recognize the huge burden that places upon our staff, because they're just trying to do their very best to provide good quality care for our residents. In addition to the lack of care hours for the residents, we also don't have that buffer to fund for things like our absences that happen routinely, not just COVID related, things like vacation or education time. How do we educate our staff if we don't have the hours to support that? Then I'd like to just touch a bit on accountabilities and funding methodology. And just an example, as operators, we're funded to meet the minimum staffing accountabilities by specific staff or profession types. So those groups can be funded for as little as 10 minutes a day within a site. And while across the board that formula might look like it works mathematically, as an operator, that's very challenging to try to function within. So if you think about a non-professional, say a therapy aide that is funded at a 60-bed site at $31.34 per hour, because that's the average wage, then this $314 in your daily funding makes it really tough to pull together a valid, reliable position for a staff member to fill. So we're often stuck with, for small single site operators, one small FTE of a position, or perhaps we can offer, if we have multi-sites, multiple positions for somebody to try to get them up to a higher FTE or closer to full-time. But that's just a challenge, and it's the way that operators have had to try to meet that, the funding accountability and stretch the resources. The other difficulty we have is we know we all have areas of time during the day when we require higher levels of staffing, because there's things like morning care or meals. We need to assist more with those things. And then there are lower ebbs in the day. So it's been a best practice, or a recognized practice in the sector, to have smaller FTE positions but larger number of staff, so that they can be adjusted throughout the busyness and the ebbs and flows of the day. So that mix of full-time and part-time staff is really contrary to what we'd like to see in terms of having a higher FTE workforce that are able to really work within the system better. From some of the work we've done with Christian Health Association, our operators estimate their average FTE is between a 0.4 and a 0.63. So that's certainly not a job that is going to provide a quality of income or even a satisfaction for employees, not something that we're able to attract people to very well. And of course, it also does not help with consistency of care and that quality of care that we're looking for from our residents. The other point here is organization size, and we know that in some of the larger organizations or in the urban centers, or larger organizations might be able to have those part-time positions that are shared amongst different sites, and then they can give somebody a full-time equivalency. When we're talking about the small sites, especially the rural sites, this is far more challenging. And we already know that we have difficulty recruiting to rural sites. So then having that compounded issue in those sites is even more difficult too. So just a few things that we have discussed as an association that we think would be helpful for us to consider and work on together. Such a great opportunity to have such a diverse group to talk about these things is really that thorough understanding of the current and future workforce profile. And Dr. Estabrooke talked about this as well. We do have some data available. Are we accessing all the data that we have, say, through the firm system, through our own operator HR systems? Can we transparently and openly share that information to help us with understanding what's going on in our work sites? Another area would be to engage with the staff, and Dr. Estabrooke talked about that, but really with an ear to understanding why are some of them staying, what's motivating them, what's helping them to continue with that resiliency in the face of all of this. What are their sore points? What does it feel like to work short-staffed all the time, or what does it feel like to work with agency staff? And so engaging with them directly, I think, will help us with understanding that better. And then we've talked about this as well, but increasing the number of domestic graduates in our spaces and helping to support that with further bursaries, further subsidization for those people who can't afford the cost of the education themselves. And then working more closely with those post-secondary institutions to have them understand what it means to work in a continuing care site. Another area is to decrease the barriers to international credentialing. We know that this is some work that's being done across the country already, and Alberta can certainly continue to move that forward as well. And then the agency issue, planning for that as a potential for something that we need to consider as operators in the future. There's all kinds of implications for that, but if we're going to have a lack of staffing for a period of time, or maybe again somewhere in the future, we need to plan for how that works so that it's not such a disruption to our work site. And I'll just finish with one last point. We've talked about adjusting the funding model, but increasing the flexibility within that funding model as well. And then once again, we've also talked about creating that relationship with our unions so that we can be collaborative and creative in terms of how we staff people in our workforce and our sites as well.
You're doing very well at switching all these microphones. Thank you. Thank you, Carla, for those insights. Really appreciate it. Also, as a component, of course, of continuing care and top of mind is what's happening in home care. And we have a quick update from CBI regarding workforce realities and their hopes for the future. And thank you, Michelle Mead, HR Manager of CBI Home Health.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And I'm very intimidated by this amazing panel up here. So I'm definitely learning a lot today. So thank you for including me. I would like to invite you to come on a short journey with me. Imagine it is 6 a.m. in the morning, minus 20, and the roads are covered in snow and ice. You wake up, pack your breakfast, lunch, and dinner because you don't have time to eat. You get in your freezing cold car. As you turn the key, you close your eyes and hope it starts because you make less than a living wage and can't afford a reliable vehicle. You are also the only provider for your family, both here and abroad. In the next 8 hours, you are solely responsible, for 12 different clients to visit in their home. You head out knowing you only have 10 minutes of paid time to get to your first client. If it takes you more than those paid 10 minutes, you will be out of pocket for that time. You get to your first client and knock on the door. You walk in and are greeted with an angry and hungry client who has been waiting for their breakfast and their morning medication. You greet the client with a warm "good morning." The client then yells at you because you didn't arrive on time. They don't care that the roads were icy. You check your watch and you realize you only have 5 minutes of time to complete care that is scheduled to take 20 minutes of time. You quickly make toast and hand out your meds. You rush out the door because you know you still have more clients to see that day. After you leave, the family of that client calls to complain that their loved one did not receive quality or personalized care and their morning care was rushed. As a compassionate healthcare worker, you also didn't feel like you were able to provide a high level of care because of your limited time and resources. You leave your first house of the day feeling unfulfilled, sad, guilty, and with low morale. More often than not, this is the experience of our caregivers in the home care industry in Alberta. Throughout my 15 years in HR, my personal mission statement has been to provide a high level of care and service to our caregivers, so in turn, they can provide a high level of care and service to our clients. However, it has become increasingly difficult to provide our hardworking frontline employees with the workplace they deserve because of funding differences of seniors' care and the extreme demand of significantly increasing acuity of clients needing home care services. The home care industry, along with our LTC partners, is difficult to recruit for. We are competing with our colleagues for a finite resource. We are also funded differently than our LTC and assisted living partners. A good example of this is how, when the very needed and welcome $2 top-up from COVID-19 was implemented, this was only initially provided to long-term care providers, and it was not provided to home care. Unfortunately, we lost a large percentage of staff to long-term care providers when this happened, because a $2 top-up is a significant increase to salary. Sorry, lost my train. There we go. As a result, a lot of our home care employees are a transient workforce. And what I mean by that is that they work in home care until they have enough experience to apply to our long-term care colleagues or AHS. Home care employees are further challenged to make ends meet with current service payment systems. Home care contracts support time for care tasks according to assessed needs. AHS pays for 10 minutes of travel time per visit, with varying recognition by employers of mileage costs for employees. So what this means is that sometimes employees may end up out of pocket, or providers are subsidizing the cost of providing care. The impact on employees is clear. The impact on quality of service for clients is equally problematic. Oh, I can't read that from that far away. Is that one more minute? Okay, I don't have my glasses on. Almost done. Home care is supposed to be about individualized services with care providers knowing their individuals and their caregivers. But sadly, with staffing shortages, low wages, hours instability, and a reduced international workforce applying to work as caregivers in Alberta, we are left with a workforce who are burnt out with a low professional efficacy. We are also left with a client group who has not experienced the personalized care they deserve. To further support how our home care workforce is feeling, I just want to share some super quick quotes, and then I promise I will be done. So these are exact quotes of staff that have exited our organization. I left home care for a number of reasons. The top was pay. Home health has seen the hardest time staffing during a pandemic, and we worked harder and were more stressed than we have ever been just to be told we're not getting raises. That felt like a kick in the gut, that our work and perseverance was not valued. Another one, the people that I work with in this organization are great. The work demands and compensation are a significant factor in my choice to leave. And finally, I leave because the wage is too low. Home care providers and CBI, we really want to be part of the transformation to increase community-based services. Sorry, lost my train of thought. And we also look forward to decisions related to the RFP process so we can stabilize this workforce. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to collaborating with you and to improve the work life of our compassionate and hardworking caregivers and improve the quality of personalized care we are able to provide to our beloved clients.
Thank you, Michelle. Your description of the nurse leaving this morning, or leaving, and you're made me feel like this morning. So that's actually happening to somebody this morning. I really appreciate your comments. Thanks so much. We know that the senior serving workforce encompasses all sectors. What are the unique workforce challenges that are faced by community-based sector, an area that is gaining well-earned importance in Alberta's transformation agenda? So I want to welcome Karen McDonald, Executive Director of SAGE Seniors Association, to give us some perspectives. Thank you.
Thanks, Marlene. I'm still reeling from the story. The community-based senior services sector includes a wide range of organizations, typically nonprofits such as senior centers and community organizations, and municipal bodies such as family and communities, social service offices, FCSS offices, that provide non-medical, community, and home-based programs and services crucial for empowering healthy aging in community. These include opportunities for social connectedness, mental health supports, access to affordable transportation and housing, homemaking and home maintenance, nutrition and food security supports, recreational activities, and person-centered support navigating and accessing available resources and services. Prior to the establishment of Healthy Aging Alberta in 2020, there was no organization mandated to support the development and coordination of community-based senior services sector, so we lag significantly behind other areas of senior services in terms of workforce development and the overall awareness and understanding of the community sector. I thought we were in the unique position of this, but maybe not so much, hearing my colleagues. In the social services sector and community sector, where we compensate our staff so poorly, often, due to the way our sector is funded, that our staff are at risk of being in the position of requiring the very services that they are delivering as professionals to low-income seniors when they themselves become seniors. I think we have the opportunity to change that together. We have positioned the community services sector's value proposition as being solely about being cost effective, when in reality the value of community organizations is multifaceted. It's their proximity and understanding of the needs of the people that they serve in community, the agility and responsiveness of community organizations to respond to the needs and wants of the people that they serve and adapt to those needs as required, the unique ability to engage volunteers and philanthropy to support the delivery of services in community, that these organizations are governed by community for community. Yes, community organizations are cost effective, and nobody is better at stretching a dollar than a nonprofit, but we cannot artificially discount the true cost of delivering essential, non-medical community-based supports that are now a non-negotiable infrastructure in our health system as we shift care into community. A recent report by Imagine Canada titled "Diversity is Our Strength, Improving Working Conditions in Canadian Nonprofits" found that, similar to what Carolyn shared earlier, 77% of nonprofit workers are women, 47% are immigrants, and 35% are Indigenous and racialized people. Workers tend to be older and better educated than the economy-wide averages, but face lower salaries and difficult employment conditions. To improve conditions for the nonprofit sector's diverse workforce, the report found that we need immediate action from funders, government, and nonprofit leaders. Funders have increasingly moved away from multi-year grants and core operating grants in community to year-to-year granting, and an increased focus on project-based grants. This reduces the stability and sustainability of these organizations. It increases competition and wasted resources, and it creates an enormous challenge in terms of recruitment and retention of staff. Grants frequently are not cost recovery, leaving these nonprofit organizations with significant financial shortfalls when delivering programs and services for the public benefit through grant funds. This often results in downward pressures on staff wages and benefits in order to sustain essential services. Multi-year grants and those that are renewed for multiple years are not indexed to inflation, often with no increase in funds for 6, 7, 8 years or more, despite increases in operating costs and staffing costs. Organizations are not able to adjust salaries for the cost of living for extended periods of time, lagging behind other sectors. A functional, sustainable continuum of senior services in Alberta must include community services, and these credentialed, highly skilled professionals must be compensated appropriately for their level of education, skill, and expertise, just as we do with other parts of our continuing of senior services. The Calgary Chamber of Voluntary Organizations, CCVO, recently released an excellent report and call to action titled "Too Essential to Fail." I encourage you to read it, get involved in advocating for the sustainability of these essential services and organizations during what I believe to be one of the most tenuous times for charities and nonprofits in Alberta's history. We are extremely fortunate here in Alberta to have a very supportive and active seniors and housing division who have supported the work of Healthy Aging Alberta since before it was a formal network. And we were delighted to see the reference in our new minister's mandate letter to improving wages in our sector. And we look forward to supporting that work and working with our colleagues across all sectors. So we're really excited to be here today.
Thank you, Karen. I just wanted to share interesting learning that came out of the AAG webinars, and that's related to Denmark, and they're experiencing the same human resource challenges in continuing care and community senior services. Some of their strategies to help improve their situation were looking to strengthen the interprofessional teams, remove unnecessary administrative tasks, and review organizational structures to improve effectiveness and increase the use of technology to support caregivers and citizens. As former Senior Vice President of Clinical Services, I saw all too well what the challenges with our workforce and staffing, including at times having to not approve somebody moving in because there wasn't staffing, which is a unhappy situation for all involved, and it affects the system, as you know, right across. And something needs to give, something needs to change. We've talked about this for a long time, so it's a great day to continue those discussions. So I want to thank all the panelists. It was wonderful to have your perspectives and from all the different areas that will set us up really well for our discussions at the table. There is a facilitator, and you'll see there is a discussion guide to answer the questions and also share what's of great importance to each of you. Thank you to the panel and for all of you, and look forward to the discussions at the table. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. So welcome to our next session. I'm going to introduce our distinguished panel before we get started. So here on my immediate left, Dr. Jan Besner. Jan is a retired Director of Health Research at Alberta Health Services and former Chair of the Health Council of Canada. Marlene Rossick, retired Healthcare and Education Leader. Luckily, Vice Chair of the Good Samaritan Organization, and deeply involved in everything and anything seniors in Alberta. Arlene Adamson, CEO of Silvera and President of ASHA. And Marion, I hope I get this right, Algahaugi. She is the project coordinator for Healthy Aging at United Way. And I'm Catherine Chubbs, and I'm the president and CEO of the Good Samaritan Organization. So our discussion now builds on the first discussion about staffing and funding for success, with a focus on changes we need to see to create work environments with empowered employees and teams. It includes the importance of increasing flexibility in service delivery to meet the needs in new and innovative ways. As I said, we have a distinguished panel representing a wealth of experience, and we look forward to hearing their perspectives on key issues important to our deliberations about the changes that we need to see. So first I'm going to turn my attention to Jeanne, who tells me this is her last public speaking event, so I'm super excited that I get to hear it. I've heard her many times and super excited that she's here with us. So Jeanne, why is optimizing professional practice fundamental to developing effective and efficient work environments? What do you think is involved?
All right, well, I'm going to try to distill about 20 years of research into the next 5 minutes, and I'll just focus on a few key points that I can hardly put enough context around. But, you know, I've been looking at healthcare system redesign since I started my undergraduate nursing education at the U of A in 1973 or 74, whatever, when the Lalonde report, you know, was big news on how to reform the healthcare system. And for the last 50 years, it's been almost that length of time, we've been talking in one way or another about essentially the same concepts, whether we're talking about primary healthcare or the Lalonde report or interprofessional practice or framework for health promotion. It's all based on the same things, which is how do we redesign the healthcare system in order to keep people healthy and not just focus on managing diseases rather than managing people. But in 20 years of research, here's what I've learned about it. Some of the key things that we need to think about in relation to professional practice. When it comes to HHR planning, in my experience, we develop our HHR plans by looking at the number of types of people that we need based on the number of people to be served in order to do X number of tasks. And most of our staff mix models and staff ratios date back to the 1960s or whatever. We have fundamentally changed not only the length and the content of education of most of our health professionals since these models were evolved, and we have created brand new roles that didn't exist when these models were evolved. But we haven't fundamentally redesigned how we deliver service in that context. So we tend to plan on the basis of, you know, as I say, the number of tasks. And what we do is we don't focus on what are the roles that we expect people to play. So we educate for people to be something in the healthcare system, not to do this task or that task. And just because we teach a pharmacist how to do immunization doesn't make a nurse of a pharmacist. Their roles are fundamentally different. The fact that each can do the task of another is irrelevant, really. The question that we should ask when we're doing HHR planning is not who can perform this task, but who should we be hiring to performing what role and why? Scope of practice research. What I've discovered is that we try to change scope of practice or understand scope of practice in our own little silos. When I was president of CARNA, we went around the province talking about baccalaureate as entry to practice for RNs and how that was going to fundamentally change the role of the RNs in the system. But we developed the policy documents within CARNA, and then we gave them to employers and to educators and to the rest of the world. And we expected that they would read those documents and somehow magically everything was going to change in practice. It absolutely doesn't. There's a difference between theory and practice. And unless you translate the theory into the practice environment with the practice environment being fundamentally involved, you're never going to get anywhere. So we educated nurses, RNs, for a different role, and they went into the practice setting, and the dominant group, which were the diploma-educated RNs, said to the baccalaureate educated RN, oh, that might be what you learned at school, but here's how we do it here. So just get real and whatever. So we educate for a practice that we want to see, and then we practice in the way that we've always practiced. So we're wasting all of our education. Job redesign. How we design work can contribute to the underutilization of staff and inefficiencies. All RN models on a medical unit automatically mean that the RNs are going to perform a lot of work that could be done by others. And the RNs will say, but when I do that task, I come at it from a very different perspective. If they did, it would be worthwhile having all RN units. But they're so busy doing the bloody tasks, they don't do the role that they're supposed to do because they don't have the time for it. So you have to think about what is it that you want people to do differently, and then your service delivery models have to be redesigned. And they're not going to be redesigned on a piece of paper. You have to have practice education. You have to get people to feel what's different about how they're doing the work that they're doing if you want to get anywhere. Leadership engagement and commitment. Alignment around a common vision is absolutely critical. And just reading a document does not align you around a common vision, because we all interpret what we read differently, just depending on our own background and our own framework and so on. I once had a mentor who helped me understand the critical importance of common vision. And he said, you know, if you scatter a bunch of leads, hopefully most of you remember what that's like, having pencil leads on a table, you drop them and they scatter all over the place. If you want to realign them, you put a magnet under the table, and all of a sudden, magically, everything aligns around exactly the same vision. That is vision. But unless it's shared and you all understand not only what we're talking about, but what are the implications of what we're talking about on the system, on other providers, on other, what exactly is the implication? How much is it going to cost? Who's going to do it? How are we going to do it? And if you don't develop that vision together, and I'm talking now about educators, regulators, employers, funders, and then there's not a snowball's chance in hell that you're ever going to get to where you want to go. Sorry to be so blunt. You cannot change the system from the bottom up. You have to have a vision, and then you can try to see what happens when you implement it at a unit level or at a demonstration project. But unless it's guided by a vision of where we want to go, so that you understand how different the practice is from the theory about what you thought was going to happen, you just don't get anywhere. And then lastly, staff development and mentoring. If you're going to change something, for example, now we're changing the curriculum for healthcare aides, we changed the curriculum for RNs, et cetera, you have to understand that changing the role of one professional is going to have an impact on the role of every other professional working in the organization. And if you want the RNs who had diploma education to practice like the RNs who are having baccalaureate education, well, you better teach them what's different about how their practice is going to look, because otherwise they create an environment that is totally anathema to what we're expecting the others to do, so we never get to where we want to go. And if you're going to change the HCA curriculum for 3 months to 4 months to 10 months, who's going to be impacted by that? What impact does it have on your service delivery models? How is it going to change your staff mix? How is it going to change the staff numbers? Therefore, how is it going to change your budget? Who's going to educate everybody to do things differently? And on and on and on. So that's my little spiel. If we don't do things differently, we'll always be where we've always been. And we've more or less been there for 50 years. So if we want to do something fundamentally different, let's change how we approach it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanne. Well said. I think I heard Jeanne deliver that speech about 20 years ago. I lived in a different province, and she was my role model ever since. So I've done my own research design agenda, very much spurred on by Jeanne's path before me. So thank you for that inspiration. So as Jeanne said, relevant 20 years ago and still relevant today. So it's time. The time is now to change. So Marlene, given the time is now, what do you think we need to do with service delivery? What approaches can improve quality of life for residents and at the same time quality of work life for our employees? What do you think are the key enablers?
First of all, culture change in continuing care can make a difference. Over the past 10 years, I've had the privilege of working with Schlegel Villages in Ontario, and then when I retired in Alberta, working with a culture change collaborative of care centre providers, examining the implementation of culture change for person-centered care and work with meaning. What did we learn? Well, culture change for person-centered practice can create positive outcomes for residents and employees. Results from Schlegel Villages after 10 years show improved resident satisfaction and positive employee development, plus the need for ongoing leadership to support change and the evolution of the workplace in relation to staffing and employee and resident expectations. It's never done. Research in Alberta and the evaluation tools from implementing the butterfly model by Lifestyle Options shows increases in staff retention and positive resident outcomes. Positive gains from culture change were also reported pre-COVID from Aged Care, Winkie, Brenda Strafford Foundation. We got to pick it up now. Empowered service delivery teams with clarity of what each role brings can move mountains, according to Dr. Sienna Kaspar. And taking this example to the current focus on recruitment and retention is an example from a care center committed to a culture of citizenship with everyone there, residents, families, staff, that established a keepers committee led by residents and families to work with staff regarding changes they could make together to retain employees. So there are important gains for both residents and employees, but staffing is the enabler. Daniela Greenwood is a well-known advocate for consistent staffing and has the evidence to show the gains for employee satisfaction and positive resident outcomes. Unfortunately, as we just heard, staffing with consistency is a challenge today. The need to improve basic funding has recently been recognized in Toronto with the major financial investment to city homes to implement cultural change across their sites with that additional funding. In Alberta, we have the additional need to remove barriers to effective teamwork. Optimizing staffing with whole jobs is very difficult with line-by-line accountability. The design of supported living with case management with Alberta Health Services and not the on-site team also causes stressors for on-site staff and contributes to resident and family concerns. So now much is also being said about the greenhouse model. I think it's that data that you presented, Carol, with the green. The greenhouse model with small homes as an innovation for facility-based continuing care, both for resident quality of life and staff satisfaction and retention. Greenhouse has a clear vision for relationship-focused quality of living for particular resident populations with consistent teams of healthcare aides with expanded roles working together in households of 10 to 14 residents. Focused education programs help staff see their enhanced roles in action, and there are defined support teams. Greenhouse data are compelling. Increased job satisfaction, reduced staff turnover, increased resident satisfaction, and improved system impacts. COVID experience was one, increased flexibility for admission of residents with different needs was another. But here's an interesting fact, maybe you don't know, that small home designs and operations began in Alberta over 20 years ago with Good Samaritan Society, which now has over 200 spaces in cottages across rural and urban Alberta, Bethany Care Society and Care West in Calgary, and Capital Care in Edmonton, also operating care homes with this model for almost as long. These organizations have 10 to 12 individuals living in households supported by in-home healthcare aides with expanded roles. Now, if you've read the literature about our projected increase in the number of persons aging in Alberta, there's another very big statistic, and it's the number of persons living with dementia. And that is really calling all of us to think about the needs of these individuals and their care partners and the care approaches for quality of living. So the Dementia Network in Calgary brought together individuals living with dementia as well as care providers with small home experiences to discuss the way forward. They were very clear. Individuals living with dementia want a difference, and they really like the small home environment. Providers spoke about the same benefits as Greenhouse with increased resident satisfaction and employee retention. But they also were very clear, another but, is that the model in Alberta for small homes is not sustainable as is. Staffing levels and funding are not adequate, placing current staff and residents at risk. And line-by-line financial accountability prevents design of effective and appropriate care teams, causing added expenses to providers. So where are we? We have two opportunities, and I believe a third from the challenges that we've heard today from Carol and Jan. The first opportunity we have to advance to the vision of quality of life for older Albertans with prosperity for all is, one, to advance culture change as a fundamental return on investment with increased staffing and funding. Second, plans by Alberta Health for transformation of facility-based continuing care that recognize the value of small home environments, both on their own and as part of new architectural standards for redevelopment of care homes, are opportunities. In fact, both of these are opportunities to build on the learning from Dr. Besner, Greenhouse, current experiences, to design in that second last doll mentioned by Carol, workplaces and service delivery teams that actually produce new results for all and show the staffing and funding requirements that are required to make this happen. But I've added a third opportunity, and actually it's our biggest call for action, because these RFPs are underway right now. These opportunities are being put forward along with the home care RFP. We heard the challenge of taking learning of new ideas, proposals for change, not to reside as a demonstration project, but to fuel systemic change. And that is a whole strategy that we have to really think about and learn from each initiative. Each initiative will bring new learning, will bring maybe evaluation capability in one, not so much in another. How do we actually mobilize systemic learning for systemic change? There is our final opportunity.
She's convinced me. You guys, how about you? I get to listen to her every day, all that energy. Thanks, Marlene. So transformation of facility-based care, as Marlene spoke about, is an expectation in Alberta right now. We have the evidence, we have the experience, and we have the commitment of providers to co-create these changes. So on that note, We continue to focus on developing work environments with empowered employees and teams in another sector. Arlene, what are you doing with your workforce development and service innovations? Tell us about what's happening in community-based housing.
Thank you. Well, first, let me just start by saying, I'm preaching to the choir when we talk about some of the injections of solutions that are needed immediately. So I operate a housing management body. It's supportive living and community housing, and sit at the table with a number of colleagues around the ASHA board representing seniors housing and community housing. And they feel the same pain. We feel the same pain about being able to attract and retain staff. Fundamentally, though, we have staff who are predominantly housekeeping, dining, maintenance, and cooks. And home care is haphazard at best, I would say, coming into community and woefully inefficient. And so critically, my number one comment would be fundamentally we need to ensure that home care are in those communities permanently, 24/7. We cannot expect dining attendants to come out of the kitchen, for in the evening and attend to people who have fallen, incontinence issues, death, etc. And so that's what was asked of this sector in supportive living through all of COVID. And we stepped up to that challenge and ensure we held to the same accountabilities as higher care. And we need to make sure now that we're resourced permanently to provide supports. This is the preventative work that's necessary across our sector. Alberta is in a very unique place with a lodge program, with a supportive living program, and we need to properly recognize it on the continuum of housing as the opportunity to keep people housed in community, and therefore an injection of dollars and opportunity is necessary. So we need to really then focus, and have been focusing on, how do we retain? How do we engage? How do we make sure that people have pride of work in those communities? And so beyond funding change is where I would like to speak. It is about valuing those roles. They are not roles climbing to health. They're not roles that are climbing to management necessarily. They are necessary, no different than when we walked out of this room and someone cleared the space, someone prepared that meal for you. You just showed up and it was there. And so we need to put some value in it, and we need to value it beyond minimum wage. And so when we look at the opportunity to work alongside of unions, it is to say, let's not create greater disparity between advocating and having wages increased for those that are in unions, and then the non-unionized employees, and in supportive living particularly, and community housing. You have people who are just getting further and further away and become the training ground for the step into those careers and those that part of the sector. So I think there's greater collaboration. It calls on us working on a sector-wide staffing model that doesn't have us cannibalizing the same pool. It calls on us creating benefits for casual labor, better vacations for staff, rent-to-own models of places for their own accommodation. They can't get into the industry, and you have people co-housing, and so that in itself creates what I would call, we are failing in social justice. That we are requiring people to come to work 3 jobs. At Silvera, I've got many staff. They're 40-year employees that have been doing 3 jobs, 3 employers for 40 years, just to put food on the table. We cannot continue to think of minimum wage as a place that holds accountability to high-level trust and the services that are necessary. Secondly, though, I would say engagement. That's a constant body of work. It's certainly for Silvera been a constant body of work. When I started in the organization, we had 50% of our employees engaged. And today we're well over 80% engaged employees, and it is done every single day. It's done by the way we recognize and value every employee as an important employee in the organization. It starts with tone at the top. When I started in the organization, it was essential that I job shadow every role in the organization and work alongside to understand and harvest the great ideas and have them shared across the organization. Sleeping over at all of our communities and and understanding what the needs of the residents are and call on the staff and the demand on the staff. So it calls on us really walking the talk as leadership in all sectors. And then reinforcing the value of those roles with employee conferences that are meaningful for those roles, constant job training. ASHA has a learning center for all of the staff, but it also then speaks to how do we ensure staff are adequately trained and choose this as a career to come in the front door, not fall into this sector, and then potentially turn over in a year and a half when they find out the complexity of serving, and housekeeping is very different in this environment than it would be in the hotel that the customer's not coming back necessarily in 3 hours. So, values-based training, employee conferences, recognition. For us, it was critically important through COVID, and now it has become standard that we will provide your meal at no cost, because that may be the only meal you get in the course of the day, and that is wellness. It's about wellness programs for staff. It's about recognition of each other and peer recognition, service of excellence awards from peers. So truly walking the talk of engagement means you have to institute all of those programs. In addition to that, it's also thinking outside the box and engaging across our sector. So we can't be everything to everyone. So it is about inviting entrepreneurs into our communities to do programs and services that they would do in the community. Yoga, stress workshops. It's theater, art therapy, residents volunteering, not just looking for volunteers outside of community, dog walking. I mean, you name it, it has to come from outside of community. One, that breaks ageism, and two, that engages people and reduces the strain on our staff directly by not having to be everything to everyone accordingly. We have in Silvera well over 200 days of caring through corporate groups coming in and doing activities and programs and volunteering inside of our community. We need to look outside of our sector for solutions to be involved and to have those wraparound services in our communities to reduce the pressure on our workload and create some level of understanding. It's also about looking at our educational post-secondary. Not just about having nursing staff do, work placement and their job opportunities within resident communities. It's also looking outside of that. Where are we having urban planners doing living classrooms in all of our communities? Product design, robotics. Where is it actually a living classroom in the community where our residents can participate and have lifelong learning? But we are actually breaking down the barriers of engaging. We're breaking down the barriers of what we perceive aging in our communities for all of the job opportunities and careers that are created. How do you do that inside of our communities so people not only understand it and apply it in their chosen career, and they plan for aging and plan communities, plan product design, plan to better service us in the entire spectrum of our aging, but also that we then stop ageism. Because until we do that, this, as example through COVID, this is a population that it's okay to die. I will leave you, if through COVID, the number of people who were in hospital were all 2-year-olds, we would have had a very different response and a very different outcome for how we change the work in this sector. This starts with valuing our aging population and that we're all on the same spectrum. And so if we don't start getting it right, we might as well start instituting MAID constantly. I don't think that's anything that anybody signed up for. So I think we've got tremendous work that is ahead of us, and valuing them as much at this stage as we do at 2.
Thank you. Well said. So some valuable new perspectives as we think about service delivery models with empowered teams. Lots of great nuggets of wisdom there. So some common themes continue: increasing funding to support day-to-day care delivery with new approaches and changes in macro human resource development, and of course approaches to education. So I'm going to turn my attention to Miriam. What do you think we need to pay attention to in developing teams in our sector today?
Thank you. Yeah, I will be speaking to the community-based senior serving sector, so the organizations in community that are supporting over 90% of older adults who are aging in their own homes in community today. I do want to say it's really hard to follow these wonderful women and their wealth of knowledge. A lot of the things that I'm going to speak about are applied to the sector that they've touched on in continuing care and community-based housing, in healthcare, because they apply to the community-based senior sector in an exacerbated way. So as I mentioned, the majority of older adults are living in their own homes in communities across the province. Community-based senior serving organizations exist to provide those non-medical but not personal care supports that are needed to age in communities well every day: assisted transportation, meal prep and support, home maintenance and homemaking, social programming, all of the things that my colleague Karen McDonald mentioned. So these are critical and essential things that address the social determinants of health that, according to the WHO, contribute to about 50% of our healthcare outcomes. So investment in those supports is critically necessary. So the continued struggle of the community-based senior serving sector is that we compete against health and housing for the same skilled workforce to provide supports to older adults. It is really difficult to attract workers into this sector due to lower wages, no pensions and benefits, the complexity of the work without dedicated resources to professional development and practice support. So workforce sustainability, both for staff and volunteers, has become an increasingly large challenge for the community-based senior serving sector. Some of you will recall there was a recent application for funding from the federal government that required 60% of the workforce to be provided by volunteers. At the same time, funding for volunteer management is really decreasing, and it is really critically important to continue to focus on volunteers as part of the workforce when it comes to community-based supports, because it continues to be an expectation that we leverage the civil society to do this work. So we did a survey at Healthy Aging Alberta around capacity, and we found out that 70% of organizations that were supporting older adults saw an increase in demand for services, as well as an increase in the complexity of the needs, while 80% reported a decrease in funding and an increase in staff turnover, mental health challenges, burnout, and just poor morale overall. So there continues to be a big issue in the sector around engaging volunteers. So although we don't have the same level of research that, for example, Dr. Estabrooke presented, we know that a lot of the same things apply to the community-based senior sector. I know I have 1 minute left. I will do my best to get through some of the pieces that I really wanted to emphasize are critically important. So a trauma-informed approach that isn't the buzzword to the way that we treat our workforce, and therefore the way that we do our work, is critically important. So there are models such as the sanctuary model that has really been successful in the US, that focuses around commitment to nonviolence, emotional intelligence, democracy, social learning, growth and change, and social responsibility. So some of those pieces are really important for us to invest in within organizations to be able to retain staff. Folks spoke about staff feeling valued and there being a line of sight to the mission of the organization. These are critically important things for the community-based sector. It is something that the community-based sector really offers as a value for folks to work within the sector. So it is important for investment to happen specifically within those sectors to be able to implement such models. An example of, in terms of professional development and investment in that space, is occurring in the social prescribing model that is being developed across the province. And there's a recognition that although we need outreach workers who are, for example, have social degrees and are trained and accredited in that way, there is also a need to engage other types of workers who are attracted through the offering of professional development within those community organizations who have the aptitude, have the attitude and are interested in supporting others and are interested in doing meaningful work, and will be supported to gain the skills through a provincially available curricula, for example, and training. So investment in creating some of these professional development opportunities that allow for a more integrated workforce and don't exclude people from being able to support within the sector are critically important. I talked really quickly about the social determinants of health earlier, and Healthy Aging Alberta is really seeing the opportunity to focus on the social determinants of health as a way of integration between sectors. So community-based supports, integrating with healthcare and with housing around holistic service provision in the community around the social determinants of health through a framework that we're calling the Healthy Aging Framework is a great opportunity, and we hope that there will be investment in this space as well going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. So thanks to our panelists for sharing what they see as opportunities for evolving service delivery with empowered employees and practice environments. I think we'll all agree it's encouraging to hear about the opportunities. I think the challenge is going to be getting some of those to come to life. So I'd like to turn your attention to the table. So question 1 we're going to be asking you to respond to is, what are the opportunities and implications to optimize staff roles and teams with appropriate funding and new flexibility in funding accountabilities in your sector? Keep in mind the day-to-day person-centered care in continuing care homes and home care, and the demonstration of new service models for both Tier 3 and Tier 2 services. The second question, how do education programs need to change to prepare students to work in cross-disciplinary, cross-sector, connected teams focused on person-directed and relational care? The third question is an opportunity to share your thoughts and examples from other jurisdictions, if you know of any. What can help educators and regulators, what help can they provide to support changes for the current workforce? And then lastly, if there's any other ideas you have that may move us forward in developing work environments with empowered employees and teams with flexibility in service delivery, we would love to hear about them. Nakumik, thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm just maybe giving you a countdown to maybe get to your seats. I wasn't sure when we're supposed to start, but I see it's 2:37. And we're supposed to start at 2:35, I believe. So, yeah, I was waiting for Linda to say, yeah, but I didn't get. Oh, maybe Jocelyn was giving me the signal and I didn't see it. Okay. Well, great. So this is the last panel of the day, and I'm pleased. It's been a fabulous day. I mean, the discussions we've been having at the tables have been just so full. And the comments so diverse, which reflects the makeup of the group here. So it's been fantastic. So good job. So the last panel of the day, we're focused on, in terms of targeted outcome, ensuring that we're evolving the workplace supply with innovation in recruiting and partnerships for robust education programs. So that's what this distinguished panel is going to be speaking on. And I'll just do a quick introduction. We've got Steve Kovacic, who's the Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer at Good Samaritan, and he's also he's on the board of directors of the ACCA. We have Ursuline Aquinode. Ursuline began her career as an LPN in LTC and is now responsible for the healthcare aid program at Makima College. Next to her is Janet York. Janet is the Dean for the Faculty of Health at Bow Valley College, and she's also an RN. Next to Janet, we've got Jennifer Ma. Jennifer is also an RN and is Dean for the Faculty of Health at Northwest College. And finally, we have Kathleen Hunter. She's a professor with the University of Alberta in the Faculty of Nursing, and she's a nurse practitioner with specialized geriatric services at Glenrose Hospital. So, welcome, everyone. So, what we're gonna call on Steve first, and the question that's posed to Steve is, from both community-based services and continuing care homes, Steve, what are your top-of-mind human resource considerations to address today's challenges and prepare for the future?
Thanks, Wayne. Can everybody hear me? It's not often that I need to use a microphone. I usually have a very bombastic voice and people can hear me. In addition, I will let everybody know when I have a microphone in my hand, it usually breaks into karaoke, so we might get into Sweet Caroline at some point during today, just letting everybody know. I also want to applaud everybody in the conversations today, and I think Wayne did allude to this as well too. It's rare that we have this many industries, this many associations, all together here to have a conversation in a specific area of focus. And I'm very excited for that, because one of the things that I'm going to be talking about as I look to the challenges, and my thoughts will be framed in 3 challenges, and that's what I want to pose to everybody here today. And the first challenge that I want to talk about is that everyone here think differently. And we have to learn from what the unintended consequences that we've just experienced over the past few years, as well and into the future. And what do I mean by that? I've had the good fortune, and again, right or wrong, we've been in a situation where it's at the end of the day, and many tables have started to actually have repetitive conversations about some of the solutions that we need to be actually addressing. And one of the things that I want to make sure is prevalent for this conversation, it is incumbent upon all of us to not let this crisis get away from us without an opportunity at hand here. Be politically active. People ask me often, why do I want to know what's happening in the political landscape? Because if we don't have an opportunity to have a conversation or be aware of who to speak to, what the mandate letters are, we're going to lose out on an opportunity to engage with the government. And right now, this conversation here today allows us to frame key messages for the government. And what's important as well too is that those messages are regardless of what the political party in place is right now. So we've seen right now, we're in a very tumultuous time in the landscape of the government. It's shifting sands is what I've been calling. And then in 6 months, we don't know the government that will be in place. So we're gonna have to make sure that these messages that we gather today are framed in such a way that we can actually, regardless of who's in power, we can have meaningful dialogue. And another key point here as well too is we often work best and we see what's happening in associations or in our organization, but we need to find our political voice. We need to work with government. And I want to stress, in my conversations that I've had, and I've had a few good conversations with government, they're listening and struggling with the same issues we are talking about today. They understand there's a labor crisis, and they're trying to also figure out what the solutions will be. And again, this will give us an opportunity to make sure that we're supporting them with tangible actions as opposed to just basically figurative things here that they can run to. In addition to it as well too, is some of the things I've been hearing is the red tape and the removal of that red tape. We've talked a lot about the fact of some of the regulations that are currently in place in getting people to come to work within the province of Alberta or work within our care homes. We need to work with the government to make sure that we're removing that red tape and having that dialogue so that our care staff, that talent, can come work in our care homes. Another big concern for us as well too is the loss of interest in joining the industry. Over the pandemic, it's almost become scary to work in continuing care. And I think we need to start changing that voice, and I'll talk about how we could potentially change that voice as we talk about through today. So a few key things here that I want to talk about, again, is a challenge to make sure that this day is not lost, that we are very active in our conversations and we know how to frame the key messages. My second challenge is that we need to think and act broadly about the supports we offer our employees and our engagement with our employees and gathering what's most valued to them. And it starts with communication. I've had a good fortune to work with the Good Samaritan Society for the past 2 years. And one of the key considerations as I joined the organization was a strong mission for what we are trying to achieve as an organization. And I do believe it's important that we continuously explain our mission within the organizations to drive people towards that North Star. We have a very active CEO. We have a very active senior leadership team that continuously reminds staff why we're here. And it's the why that becomes more important. We've all heard about making sure what's in it for them, but it's all about the why we're in the industry we're in, and that further explains of a calling. And then we'll talk about a little bit more about the calling. Next is the retention and engagement and recognition of our staff. And while it might seem obvious during this labor crisis, do many of us know what does engagement and recognition look like for our employees? We've all seen best practices, we've all engaged with best practices, we can read online of how do we can engage our staff. Recently, one of the things we've done within the Good Samaritan is actually ask our staff, what does recognition mean for you? And how can we actually use that information in forming a recognition strategy so that we can actually move the dial on engagement for our staff? So we want to have that two-way dialogue with our staff. It's from communication from leadership to open the doors to make sure that they're recognizing there's two-way communication, but there's also from recognition and engagement, ensuring there's a full circle, full closed loop there, and ensuring that we actually understand what's most meaningful to our employees. Another thing we talked about, and again, leans off of what Blair mentioned earlier today, and a lot of other good leaders have been talking about, is leadership. And how are we ensuring we have the right leadership in place, we have the right accountabilities in place, we have the right scope of work in place. A recent strategy that the Good Samaritan has undergone just last year was a full organizational review. Sometimes you can't change the bigger picture, but you can focus on what's important in your organization right now. So it's actually reviewing what is the right scope of work for the staff and ensuring that we're not creating our own red tape internally to the organizations. So doing an organizational review and making sure you have the right layers, you have the right accountabilities for the right players so things can move streamlined and effectively. We've talked a lot as well too about agencies, and we've talked a lot about how they're being successful. But many of us are starting to question what makes them so successful. And is it the flexibility they're offering their staff? I think we're going to have to start changing our voice with regards to recognizing what's important for the demographic that's coming down the pipeline. We've been saying a lot of conversations right now at the tables. Is it a one FTE or is it a combination of FTEs or part-time work as well too? Because the demographics now in a post-pandemic world are changing, and the things that people value most are changing. They're looking for quality of life. And the government's actually challenged industries to say, don't just stick to what's the most traditional aspects of how business has been done. Have an open mind and have a look at your workforce and see what's most valuable. I'll speak quickly as well too about equity, diversity, and inclusion. Is that the demographics that we saw on the slides ahead, our slides previously, is that the demographic that works in our associations, in our organizations, are diverse. And we need to put in place a broad equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy in all of our homes. Because even if we do international recruits, we have to make sure that everything is welcoming and warm for those employees that come into our care homes. Recently, again, within the Good Samaritan, we're focusing on reconciliation. And there was talk today about how do we further engage with the Indigenous population in Alberta as an untapped workforce, potentially, so that we can actually support them as well as support our homes. And finally as well too, one of the things we have to stop doing is being so humble. Continuing care is a very humble industry. And we have to start changing the tone for which has been out there right now that it's an unfavorable industry. We need to tell our story. We need to make sure we're active on social media, showing the good work that we're doing. And that is a calling for employees and for others to come into our organizations. Work with your communications department to make sure that the stories are being told externally to change that reputation. And I'll finally kind of conclude with regards to new markets for attraction. We need to really open up our minds with regards to really what is a workforce of today. We've all been looking at the long-term strategies and mid-term strategies, international recruits, increasing the amount of seats in post-secondary institutions. But there might be an untapped market in the 55-plus age workforce. Those that are nearing retirement, that actually could be that mentorship program for new and upcoming individuals within our organizations. We've installed the mentorship program inside Good Samaritan, and we're preparing our leaders for that as well too. But I think we need to start reconsidering what does an appropriate demographic look like within our continuing care industry, and just keep an open mind. At that, I see my time is up before the hook gets called here, so I'll pass the baton on.
Great, thank you, Steve. You know, you had a lot of interesting ideas there, certainly, and I totally agree with you about the need right now to engage with government and to understand what their mandates are for the various ministers. We have this window of opportunity that's available to us right now, and we've got to make sure that we get it over the line here before it closes on us. So this is a great start in this particular issue on workforce capacity. So I encourage you to, you know, make sure you get out there and continue that dialogue. Next, I'm going to ask Ernslyn, in your role at McKenna College, a college by immigrants for immigrants, what is important to create positive work environments with foreign educated professionals and immigrant students and employees?
That's a very good question. Thank you for having me. This is a pleasure to be sitting among so many experts, which I'm not. What I'm going to speak in regard is simply from my experience and that of the experience of my students at the college, which I'm the head of the department. Most importantly, our experience showed the need to prepare our students, with 90% of them being immigrant, with the understanding, the skill, perseverance to work and care environment where resident and family as well as fellow staff may not be so welcoming. So you may ask me, what do you mean? To provide a positive environment, the understanding and acceptance of the student as being a new Canadian must be present. We must allow them to show their strength and showcase their ability. We have many of our students that have high degrees in education they have received prior to coming here to Canada. Unfortunately for them, they cannot utilize those existing skills. They must meet the new standard. Many of these individuals have higher education and level of skill than in which they can practice as an HCA. Okay? Offering mentorship program and allow them to actively perform the skills to confirm that in fact they meet competency, it's what we must do. Provide effective onboarding that identified site culture. Having team member providing a presentation identifying how to embrace that culture. Offering mentorship program and community outreach to be well-versed in culture diversity is key, I must say. For example, a student hearing a staff making discriminatory statement about the sex and the skin color and why they choose to be an HCA. That incident occurred in clinical placement, and we were fortunate enough that that incident was recorded and the staff responsible for making such discriminatory statement were reprimanded accordingly. Imagine, this experience could have stopped the student in his track and stopped him from the journey toward becoming a competent healthcare aide. I am happy to report that that was not the case, as the student remember his or her why. Why did I start to be an HCA? And I am glad to report that the student right now is working as a competent healthcare aide and making a difference out in the field. As an educator, it's super important that we build positive relationship with clinical site. That means making frequent and prompt site visit to address issues and work together to develop positive relationship. One aspect that I think that facility may overlook is how to prepare their current staff to provide a welcoming atmosphere that is based in inclusion and not fear of replacement. Do you know what I mean? A common sentiment I have experienced when bringing students to clinical site is they are being welcomed by hostile and apprehensive staff. We have learned the importance of collaboration with senior staff to reduce the sentiment of insecurity due to the student update training, so-called, or lower wage entry. Second, the success of our immigrant students means paying attention to their life challenges, family situation, income, language, that may be more significant than any other student. That means thinking vigorously about programs like the HCA bursary, perhaps. It also means taking extra time to support those students, which we pride ourselves at doing at Macquarie College. Those support go way beyond what you may understand. That is providing money for even provincial exam we write. And I would suggest learning from these student barriers to completion with current approach to the certification exam. It is such a high-stake exam, and they put so much. Having that certificate means being able to provide for their family back home and their family here. Some students just crumble under that pressure. We definitely must have to take another look and see how we can support them. Third, Steve talked about expanding options for students. Current conversation focus on increasing number of persons with credentials, but are we missing a place for immigrants to begin their career in the seniors service sector? I have had housekeeper, people from the kitchen speak to me while I'm making visit and clinical site. Ernslin, how can I become an HCA? How can I grow within this environment? Perhaps employers could be able to support those seeking to advance and to become healthcare aide and build a program where they can do the learning on site. I have had a very compassionate housekeeper that I was able to speak to and took the healthcare aide program. We, as a college, has really supported her through her journey, which was not easy. She did everything perfectly with the support. Unfortunately, at the end of the 10 months, she had to do the provincial exam. With high test anxiety, I'm sad to say that we were not able to help her reach her goal. And that is the story of many of our students. So, to end, a work environment that asks what is important to you is more positive than one who says, I don't understand you, so please just do that. While it is impossible to acknowledge and celebrate and recognize off of each possible variety of culture, it is not impossible to create an environment open to consider incorporating whatever is brought into the community by community member, and balance this against the existing corporate culture so it's not over-correct or overcompensated. Much like modification that we make in the classroom to include, not accommodate, a student with additional support, to work environment can open communication to understand what is important or needed by their community, the workforce. Based on that communication, modification can be made and then evaluate for efficacy. Change, I tell you, is not a singular action. It is something ongoing that requires review and adjustment. Much like driving in the highway, your hands are on the wheel, constantly making minor adjustments to reach your destination. We must continue to make steps toward reaching that goal of inclusion and collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernslin. Certainly, we all know that this workforce capacity issue that we're dealing with, part of the solution is definitely foreign educated health professionals coming to our province and helping to fill those roles, and we need to put in place that support for them so that they can actually be successful in what they have chosen to do. Next, we're going to have Janet and then Jennifer speak, and what they're going to be addressing is how might education programs change to increase student enrollment and effectiveness of learning for careers as seniors services workers.
Thanks, Wayne. So I'll start off. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thanks for the invitation. I'm from Bow Valley College, and what I'm going to share is just my experiences at Bow Valley College. And so with respect to enrollment and recruitment of healthcare aides, the government sent out a call for proposals knowing that there was a crisis to have healthcare aides. And so many of the healthcare aid deliver programs submitted proposals to increase their numbers. So we were quite optimistic that we could, add another intake, add some more, students to the intakes that we already had. But unfortunately, it didn't work that way. We aren't meeting our targeted enrollment expansion grant numbers. And as a matter of fact, one intake that we had added on for winter 2023 in the region outside of Calgary, we had to cancel. We had 3 applicants, 3 registrants. So we had to move those 3 into the main campus. Now they're going to have to travel if they want to continue on. So I'm not too sure if they've, accepted that main campus offer. Over the past year, we haven't been meeting our targets. Winter 2023 coming up, we're down 43% of what our targets are. Even this past fall, we didn't meet our targets by 33%, which is down from last fall where we were a little bit better. We did better, but it's going the wrong way, our target. So we're not meeting those targets. So some of the things that, we're looking at, as educators, like how can we increase enrollment? What are the barriers, for students coming into the program, and how can we, try to assist with that? So some of the, things that we're thinking, and I think there's a variety of barriers or obstacles, is, as you know, the healthcare aid program went from a 4-month program to an 8-month program. So there was, a change in the curriculum. They added more theoretical knowledge for communication, dementia, I think professionalism was in there, and maybe a couple others. And so now, instead of a 4-month program, it's an 8-month program. So it's going to take longer to have healthcare aides cycle out of their education program. So with the increase from a 4-month to 8-month program, it added more courses, more clinical courses, so that increased the cost of the program. At that time too, the admission academic requirements were increased. English 10 was the academic requirement, and I believe at that time that was the only admission requirement. So the English was increased to grade 11 from grade 10, and an addition of English language proficiency, which made it a little bit difficult to assess, and in some respect even was more than what some programs in practical nurse were requiring for English language proficiency. We also look at the number of sites that deliver a healthcare aid program in Alberta. There's 25 approved institutions to deliver a healthcare aid program. So we're competing against one another, not only for the students, but also for qualified instructors, to teach at these institutions. Also with that, we're recognizing that it may not be an easy process for healthcare aides to come from other provinces and, be easily assessed to start working immediately in Alberta as a healthcare aide. There's rigor in the ELP requirements or English language proficiency requirements, and it can take up to 12 weeks for assessment, if there's no experience in Alberta. So that could be a perceived barrier there.
There's also, other things that we are trying to do, to help with this reduction, but, we have to answer to the powers that be in academica, and if we're not making our targets, then, it puts the program, into consideration. Do we continue on? And we certainly do want to continue on. We know that healthcare aides are needed, but we need to come together to try to solve this and make the healthcare aide profession attractive. And I think that was also discussed earlier. Healthcare aid, Alberta Health was excellent in providing funding for healthcare aides, students and employers. But the bursaries that are there, it's hard to navigate. And so I think we have an opportunity to work with Alberta Health and all the deliverers to come up with a better way for students to access that money, access it up front, and not wait, to the end or through midway their program to access that funding. I've only got a little bit left here. With the new curriculum came a provincial exam that students have to pass before they can work. Even if they're granted their certificate and they've made, met the outcomes of the program at the institution, they still have to wait until they pass that provincial exam. And looking at the numbers, I think we need to really look at what the pass rates are over the last year or two that this new curriculum's been in force, and work on seeing if we can improve it, really analyze those numbers, because I have a feeling that, for the first attempts, students aren't coming back for a second or third attempt. So, even if we had 1,600 students that wrote the first time, we might only have 1,000 that actually, finished the program successfully, and we were able to give them their certificate. So I think we're at a unique time here, with the workforce crisis and, and the change coming to continuing care and post-COVID. And I hope I can speak for all the educators that, we're here to help. We want to be part of the change, and we just feel that this is a great opportunity to transform education to meet the needs of the employers. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet. Jennifer?
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me today. I feel very honored to be able to sit on this panel and to be able to share information with you and to be part of the day. There's been some really good conversations at the table, and I feel like those conversations could go on for many hours into the night. And I feel like I can talk about this topic for a long time, but I know that I have 6 minutes, so I better be on my way here. Like Janet said, I really do think that education is a partner in change, and we're one cog in that wheel of change, and working with the various sectors that will be able to make a difference in the healthcare system, especially for seniors. So I really hope to see how this builds out as we move forward. I'm focused really in talking to you about the LPN program. And so I think that what you might hear from me is similar to what you would have heard from Janet and Ursuline as well. Unlike the healthcare aid program, though, there's still demand in the LPN program, and there's long wait lists of hundreds and hundreds of people waiting to get into the LPN program, and it's about capacity for that program. We don't have the seats or the funding to be able to increase our seats. The other challenge that we do face is on placements. And we're not able to acquire enough placements to even increase our capacities. So one of the things that we've been exploring is simulation. And in COVID, one of the good things that happened in COVID is that we were required to really pivot quickly and use technology in order to educate students. And so simulation is one part of the technology that we used, And our instructors were very innovative in that they found ways to teach students about skills. And for a very brief time in the very beginning of COVID, no one could go into the post-secondary institutions. So one example is that one of our instructors taught students how to create their own mannequin at home so that they could do skills. So I was so pleased and almost started crying when I heard about the things that they were doing in order to really just help students to learn. Then, of course, it opened up and we were able to go into the labs. And one of the things that we use, and I know that Janet and I have had a lot of discussions about using simulation to help to educate students, is it's an opportunity for us to not only teach skills, but to teach about roles and to teach students to learn about the different roles. So an interdisciplinary way of learning in a low stress environment. And as you may know, when you're high stressed, you can't learn. That stress, that response just doesn't allow your brain to learn as quickly as when you are at a lower stress point. So simulation offers an opportunity for students to learn in an environment that is safer for, of course, the patients as well as for the students. And they can have conversations there to learn about not only the role that they have to acquire, but also the roles of other team members that they'll be working with. There'll also be, I think, an opportunity to increase or change the quality of the experience. When students go into the clinical environment, the experience varies. So they may have an experience with a person with dementia at one point, but they may not, and like another student may not have the same experiences. So simulation offers the opportunity to standardize that and ensure that the students come out with at least a set of experiences when they graduate. I don't mean, though, that they shouldn't have a clinical experience. Of course, that they should as well. The other thing that I think that simulation does is that it offers a different environment. When we're wanting to make a change, we need to introduce students in an environment where there is change happening. When they go into the clinical environment, the culture is the culture that it is. Whereas in simulation, we can manipulate that culture and try to teach them a different way of working and to have conversations about those things that they may not have time to do in the practice setting, such as equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism. When those comments, like Ursuline had talked about, occur, there's not time in the clinical setting to have an educational conversation about that. So simulation offers that. Like Ursuline said, equity, diversity, and inclusion is another area that we've been focused on. And so that's something that we've tried to include in the education in the LPN program. Like we've heard through the day, the workforce is very diverse, and they need skills to be able to work with each other and the various values that they come with, as well as the various values of the people that they work with. I think there's a cultural change, hopefully coming, and I do hope that the education partners, that we're part of that change and working with you to make that impact. One of the ways that you can participate in education is through our advisory committees. I know at Norquest that we have an advisory committee. I think that most educational institutions have an advisory committee where practice partners can come and give feedback about what's happening in practice so that we can align our education with what's happening in the practice settings. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Janet and Jennifer. We're coming to the last person on our panel, Kathleen. The question that you're going to speak to is the opportunity to evolve BSCN learning has never been more important. Look forward to your personal perspectives.
Thank you. So we do have challenges in baccalaureate education.
for nurses. And I'll start off with 3 of those that I see. And even though I am a nurse practitioner, I do keep my hand in the undergraduate program and have been doing some research with a colleague of mine, Sherry Dahlke, the last few years looking at undergraduate education. So challenges. I put one of the biggest challenges that we face, and it's not unique to the students coming into the university. I'm sure the students that come into Norquest face the same thing, and that's ageism. We have so much ageism in our society, and these students have been exposed to that, throughout their growing years, their teen years, and there's ageism in healthcare services as well, and that's been well documented in the literature. We know that students come into the university, they've already been influenced by this social ageism, but they're also influenced by family values. And one of the things we learned in talking to students in our studies is that it appears that students who have had really positive family experiences with older people have a very different outlook on their career possibilities early in their nursing program. And students that have had no exposure with older people, maybe their family has been more distant, that they haven't had a chance to work with be with their grandparents, they're going to come in and they know nothing. And all their information is coming from this society, this ageist society, and then they hit the healthcare system, which has similar issues. The second issue, the challenge that we have, is that students receive messages about the RN role and the value of older people in healthcare settings. And that comes from a variety of sources. It's going to come from their preceptors. It might come from their instructors. Again, they might hear it from other people in the healthcare system while they're in their program. And then we give really some interesting messages as they go along. So oftentimes they get a sense that long-term care is where you learn, and I'm going to put the air quotes on, the basics of care. So we put them there in their first year, and we teach them a bunch of tasks. And we don't teach them, we use language like simple care and basic care. And I think we got to change that language in our programs. One of the researchers that I've been reading quite a bit the last few years is Kitson and her relational care model. And instead of calling it basic care, she calls it fundamental. What kind of message is it? Fundamental care, right? And it's all around relationships. So I think that has to change. They also get messages that, because they do a lot of time in the hospital, more time in the hospital than they do in long-term care, they get messages that, well, old people really don't need to be in the hospital, right? So they're social admissions. We have a lot of this negativity going on. And we get binary language going on, which prevents them from seeing the complexity, So people are continent or incontinent. They're demented or they're not demented. So that's really narrow language. And then we give some really subtle messages, and some of them aren't so subtle. We use that long-term care, first placement, first year. They're terrified. Okay. What do? We tell them in fourth year, and I have to say my own program practiced this for many years. The high GPA students get to go to critical care. Okay. So that's where smart nurses go, right? So we got some real interesting messaging going on. And out of our research, Maya Kalaru wrote a really interesting paper, and I can send anybody the reference from the students or the interviews we did with students, and that's working with older people is the beginning or end of your nursing career, right? Where you start out, where you retire. So, all right, still there. Some of the innovations that are happening, we do have national standards
for entry to practice gerontological nursing competencies that are put out by the Canadian Association of Schools of Nursing. We don't yet know how well those have been adopted. There's some more research that needs to be done. We need to take some models. So Laurie Schindel-Martin at the Toronto Metropolitan University is teaching the complexity of dementia very intentionally using her gentle persuasive approach. And then we've developed on our research team learning modules on gerontological care, communication that includes ageism, continence and mobility, cognitive impairment. And this has been funded by SSHRC. Dr. Dalkey has a grant from SSHRC, which is very prestigious in the research world. And we've piloted them at the U of A, and they're currently being run at 2 other universities in Canada, one here in Alberta and one in Ontario. So we're going to learn a lot more about how we can deliver the kind of messages we would like the students to hear. And finally, I'll just say, what do we need to attract and retain RNs, so these students that are going to come out and be our new RNs? How will we get them to say, yes, I want my career in continuing care? I think integrating those gerontological competencies is going to be very important. We need to create placements with knowledgeable instructors and preceptors. We have a lot of research evidence that shows there's an awful lot of nursing instructors that don't have gerontological knowledge. So we need to bring them along. And then finally, I think that education institutes really need to work with their partners in the providers to really think about how do we develop career trajectories. And that doesn't mean leaving direct care, but that means how do we get the nurses to see this as a place where I can spend my career and grow. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much to the panelists for sharing with us the challenges and opportunities that they face in their respective areas. I was just thinking about a recent media article that came out last week, and it was around the Toronto Municipal Homes and the grant that they received from the government. And you know, it was all about trying to create culture change, and we've talked a lot about culture change and the need for that going forward. And by having that extra money, they were able to hire another 270 staff for those 10 homes, and they went from a task-based orientation to more of a resident centered one. And the results were, you know, even in the short term, the results were immediate. And they saw that, you know, the residents certainly appreciated the opportunity to have some control over how they live their lives in their homes, but the staff as well. The staff just felt that they were able to do what they needed to do and wanted to do for their residents. And something as simple as, you know, they talked about a healthcare aide or a personal support worker that had, you know, 10 or 11 people that they were caring for during a shift, and it was down to 8. And just that alone, the difference that made in the way she was able to do her job and the satisfaction she got from it. So it's just, there are some things that we can do, certainly, immediately, that will help. And it's really going to be something that, you know, we're talking about longer term priorities that we need to identify, strategies that we need to deploy. We also need to do things that we can do right now, because the need is right now. So in that light, the questions that all the different tabletops are going to address are, you know, what new ideas do you have to recruit people to work in senior services sectors? The second question is, how do we make it easier and more attractive to students to enroll in and complete the healthcare aid program? We heard about some of those challenges. Third, what opportunities and implications are there to increase enrollment in education programs for health and social programs? So, and of course, anything else that comes to mind that we haven't, you know, as your creativity goes, it would be great to hear anything else that you have to say. So get together with your groups and get at her in the last session of the day.
Can I get a photo with everybody here?
Okay, can I bring everybody back? Just wanted to be brief in our wrap up because I know everybody wants to get home. Some of us have a ways to drive, and although I hate to interrupt these wonderful discussions, but I did want to, before I turn it over to Carmen and Vivian, I just wanted to acknowledge Alberta Health, who has provided a grant for us all to get together. So I want to thank them for that, and thank all of you for being here today. One thing, I've asked Jocelyn to get in touch with everyone who attended by email to see if you're all okay to share your names and email addresses, because people have said, I want to get in touch with this one, this one, this one, and follow up. So just let us know if you'd prefer not to share your information. So I'm just going to turn it over to Carmen Gerbusik.
Great, thank you very much, Lynn. Yeah, I'm here on behalf of Alberta Health. My assistant deputy minister was here earlier in the day, and she really regrets that she wasn't able to stay the whole day. She would have otherwise provided some closing remarks. So I know on behalf of her and myself and all our colleagues from the department here today, we really want to thank AAG and AGNA for putting together and planning such a tremendous day. Lynn recognized our grant funding. I think we got more than our good share with that budget investment. The day was so well organized, and just as a few of you have noted throughout the day, just the mix of conversation at the tables and all the different perspectives. And the pillars that you grounded the day on are really what we too are looking at as some of our pillars in our ongoing work related to continuing care, workforce, and strategies. So we are anxiously awaiting the narrative, the sort of report summary you put together, but rest assured it is in line with what we're thinking and planning as well. So that's been terrific. Yeah, and I won't go on too long. As you mentioned, I know a number of you have got some highway travels, but all that to say, throughout the day, it's been great getting together with colleagues and friends who I've worked with for a long time, and when I asked them to share on their reflections, it was so positive, and a byproduct is being able to get together in person and talk and share our perspectives. And as Lynn just noted, people, not only the business at hand today of talking through these strategies, but what we're learning and sharing that will help us in our day-to-day roles within our different organizations. So that's a tremendous byproduct as well. So really want to thank you again for that as well. So, and I'll hand it over to Vivian.
On behalf of AAG, I'm very pleased to share with you some of my thoughts on this very important, productive day. First of all, I want to thank you all for spending a very valuable day of your life on this very important topic. When the facility-based review report by MMP was done, and I was lucky enough to be part of that team, we have identified workforce as the most important issue and problem, actually, facing the transformation of the continuing care system in the next decade. It is difficult because not one single party can resolve the problem. And unfortunately, money alone also would not solve the problem. Yes, we do need lots of money for the deficit staffing, so that Carmen get the message. But money alone. What we need is a coordinated, integrated plan that involves employers, staff, clinical leaderships, families, clients, educators, policymakers, and many others. So folks, I think you've done it. I am totally impressed. This is the first workshop I can see, and I work in continuing care for about 30, 40 years, where beyond the government and the associations, we have clients, we have families, we have educators, we have everybody there, and you also sincerely work towards a common cause. I'm totally optimistic this time. I have been sort of frustrated before. That's why after I retire, I'm still working, because the problem is not fixed. So I'm very optimistic today, seeing how we have done the work together. But unfortunately, this is, I would assess it to be 50 to 60% is done. So you probably ask me what else needs to be done. Because AAG sponsored this work, our plan was based on all your discussion, and it have been carefully recorded, and it will be written in a report. We have an outstanding multi-sector planning committee. I'm sure they will make sure all that your recommendation will be included in the report. Our stakeholder group that has 54 members of all the stakeholders in Alberta will be meeting in February. So the first draft of this report will be given to that committee to review, and they can also add or subtract the comments. After that, we will ask them to circulate the draft report to the members. This is, of course, based on AAG board's decision, but I don't see there's anything confidential in the recommendations. The more people got involved in the report, the better it will be. In fact, one thing we contemplate is to put it into the website so that Albertans feel they have a chance to look at it too. Then after that, depending on the time availability and resource availability, the AAG target is to have a policy position paper forward to the government in March, just in time before the election. We influence all the parties. Whoever they want to talk to us, we want to talk to them. So we think that with the position paper, at least I will encourage the committee that write it to not only make recommendations, but to make sure the recommendation lists the priorities, because that's how the MMP report so successful, is that we are very concrete. We recommend how many small homes we recommend, and so on, and we recommend the organizations. We need to say, list the organizations that are involved, that responsible for doing the work. It cannot be left to the royal we, because we ourselves, each one of us has a role to play. So I want to let you know that the other remainder, maybe 40–30% of the work, we collectively have to review the draft report critically and make sure it's say what you want to say. But I am extremely optimistic this time around, very hopeful. So thank you very much for the contribution today, and I wish we will, this will be the beginning of a transformation on a very difficult problem in continuing care. Thank you, and on behalf of AG, thanks for spending a cold, snowy day with us. Good luck in your driving home. Thank you.